better off without them, apparently. Number 10 in the countdown. The Christian view of women in ancient Roman society came in and, like the religion itself, quashed the pagan beliefs preceding them. Pagan times in Rome weren't a merry old good time for women, don't get me wrong, but they had more rights and respect when there was a whole pantheon of women gods whose tempers were to be revered and feared by every Roman man. But then they convert and answer to one god who was depicted as a soul man, making it, pun intended, a man's world. In the 4th century AD, the Andrew Tate of ancient Rome, St. Jerome, set the standard on how you should perceive and treat women around you. If your wife has a bad temper, or if she's stupid, or if she has a birthmark, or if she's haughty, or if she has a foul breath, you'll only learn these things after marriage. You always have to tell her how beautiful she looks. If you so much as look at another woman, she feels rejected. You have to bow down before her and call her my lady, and you mustn't forget her birthday. It's worse if she's pretty than if she's ugly, because then you have to constantly be on your guard. Honestly, try and tell me you can't picture some old Roman bald dude in a toga, like white beard, one of those stupid teak tables, wearing the oversized podcast headphones, saying that exact tirade while like Joe Rogan is sitting across from nodding like, yeah man, yeah, that's what's up. Hey dude, kinda makes sense that you're only gonna find out about her personality after you married her, when y'all don't even know each other when you get married and you bought her at a bride auction like she's a cow for your farm. So, according to St. Jerome, it was better to be alone with God than in the company of a woman. Guess God is a woman, because he was found in bed having an affair with a married one. Oopsies, hypocrite. Alrighty, that was a beautiful segue into number 9, the discussion of how women in ancient Rome could be worshipped but never equal. As stated, while Roman society may have been dominated by men, their original godly pantheon was anything but. They bowed to powerful women, begging for mercy or pleasure from their female goddesses. Part of the appeal of Christianity was bowing to a woman no longer. They finally became obsolete, powerless. But they were anything but powerless in the era of Roman paganism. Of the 3 supreme deities worshipped by ancient Romans, only one, Jupiter, the king of gods, was male. The other 2 were Juno, the chief goddess and protectress of the empire, and Minerva, Jupiter's daughter, the goddess of wisdom and war. The Vestal Virgins, aka priestesses of Vesta, were ranked among the city's most important residents, having been appointed to this role before puberty, remaining chaste for the next 30 years of their lives. These 6 virginal women held sacred duties like preserving the hearth fire, and Vesta's temple, as it was believed if the fire died, so would Rome. That's a pretty serious job. They also had the most important duties in the kingdom, such as safeguarding the wills of the wealthiest and most prominent Romans, such as Julius Caesar himself, because women were more trustworthy than men, but they weren't to be trusted. Okay, anyway, the priestesses' religious significance gave them unusual power and influence, and they occasionally used it, as when they intervened to save the young Caesar from the dictator Sulla. This worship of women and deifying them into earthly roles such as the Vestals had been the saving grace of women's rights in the horrifically male-centric Roman society. Unfortunately, as said, it was swept away in the name of man.
In 8th place, we have geisha beauty. So during the Heian era, geishas would blacken their teeth using a mixture of oxidized iron fillings steeped in an acidic solution. One of the main reasons for this practice was the fact that for hundreds of years, pitch black objects were regarded as immensely pretty, and unlike the Western ideals that folks like myself have been raised with, that's just how things were there. The women used to remove their heavy makeup with a nightingale poop, which apparently did wonders for their skin. The active chemical in the bird poop is guanine, which allegedly cleanses the skin and rejuvenates it. Now, geishas aside, back in the day, the beauty of Japanese women was often judged on the basis of their hair length, and the ideal length was considered 2 feet below their waist. I don't want to think about how long it would take to brush hair that long, never mind the hairballs that would form. Or maths. Nah. In 7th place, we have the use of copper. So copper apparently has many benefits for the skin, one of which is that it can help to heal wounds and scars, along with having anti-aging properties. Ancient Egyptians used a lot of copper for their skin, and according to modern dermatologists, copper peptides are well known in the skincare world, so apparently I've been hiding under some sort of rock. They improve skin, including firmness, smoothness, and reduction of fine lines and wrinkles by promoting collagen, elastin, and improved antioxidant activity. Just a little note though, too much copper intake can make you nauseous and give you gastrointestinal issues, or cause serious organ system toxicity. Good news, I'm not gonna freak out my gold-loving dad today by replacing silver with copper as my favorite metal. Honest to goodness, even just choosing to have fake silver ornaments on my Christmas tree over gold last year almost started a full-blown argument in Canadian Tire. It was a whole thing. In 6th place, we have Egyptian makeup. Look, Look, everyone knows about ancient Egyptian using coal around their eyes to shield against the sun, deter flies, and overall just look stunning. Personally, I very much still appreciate the practice, along with my collection of eyeliner pens. I currently have like 4 black ones on the go for reasons. If you don't believe me, here are the 2 I have on me that I used to touch up this makeup with before I started talking today. But what you might not have known was that crocodile dung mixed with donkey's milk was used by Cleopatra as a face mask. She also famously bathed in milk with rose petals for hours, which honestly, goals. Cheeks were blushed up using a mixture of clay and crushed beetles, which was something also done later on by Queen Elizabeth I to get her memorable red lips. One of the most popular cosmetic ingredients in ancient Greece was olive oil. According to legend, a Greek cook named Calamus invented soap by mixing olive oil with wood ash from Mount Sappho so it could be used for cleaning utensils at sacrifices. However, when he washed his hands with this mixture, his skin became soft and smooth. It was clear that olive oil had cleansing and beautifying properties. So you're telling me that my big fat Greek wedding lied to me about Greeks using Windex for everything? Curse you, Hollywood. In 5th place, we have a dimple machine. In the 1930s, dimples were considered to be one of the most beautiful accessories any gal could have, leading to Isabel Gilbert inventing the dimple machine in 1936, which promised to give you dimples. This contraption, also referred to as the dimpler, consisted of a chin strap that held 2 soft rubber dimple indenters in place, one on each cheek. The strap had a coil that created pressure and was described as very uncomfortable, and the dimples left your face within a few hours anyways. Jeepers, I guess a lot of folks really wanted to look like Shirley Temple, which is fair. She was pretty adorable. I feel like nowadays, thanks to the interwebs, we have a lot more folks that we can decide that we want to look like. Personally, I'm a mix of wanting to look like my celebrity crush and a Bratz doll, or a Barbie, depending on the day. In 4th place, we have hair secrets. Alrighty, let's spin the wheel to see where we're starting with this one. Greece. Alrighty, to achieve blonde hair, which was highly coveted, women would drench their hair in vinegar to bleach it, which would lead to, hair loss and thus the popularity of wigs. Something I didn't know before today was that in ancient Egypt, only women from higher classes were allowed to have long hair. Enslaved women had to cut their hair very short, and the hair cut off was often used for making headpieces for the aristocrats. Before hairspray was invented, women used to use lard to keep their huge wigs in place. There were many times when rats jumped on women's wigs from the smell of the lard. Okay, that's a big no for me. Sure, I attract the occasional flies with the amount of hairspray that I wear when I curl my hair, but that's plenty. Modern sidebar. During the World War II days, women had to make do without wax and used sandpaper to remove unwanted body hair. Yeah, I'm shuddering. In 3rd place, we have Roman makeup. So the Romans attributed great power to cosmetics. Cosmetics first used in ancient Rome for ritual purposes were just part of daily life. Some fashionable cosmetics, such as those imported from Germany, Gaul, and China, were so expensive that the Lex Oppia tried to limit their use in around 189 BCE. These designer brands spawned cheap knockoffs that were sold to poorer women. Working class women could afford the cheaper varieties, but may not have had the time to apply the makeup, as the use of makeup was a time-consuming affair because cosmetics needed to be reapplied several times a day due to weather conditions and poor composition. Cosmetics were applied in private, usually in a small room where men did not enter. Cosmetae, female slaves that adorned their mistresses, were especially praised for their skills. They would beautify their mistresses with the cultus, the Latin word encompassing makeup, perfume, and jewelry. Scent was also an important factor of beauty. Women who smelled good were presumed to be healthy. Due to the stench of many of the ingredients used in cosmetics at the time, women often drenched themselves in copious amounts of perfume. Romans believed that the smoke from the burning ambergris would make women more attractive. Ergo, ambergris was typically used in face powders for this reason. Another trick involved sitting over straw fires to make hair shine, or sleeping in a vase filled with red chicken fluid to make it thicker. If that wasn't gross enough, urine was included in facial masks that women used to look clean and beautiful. They also used urine to whiten their teeth as well. Hard pass. In 2nd place, we have the uses of baths. Nowadays, I know I personally love a good bath to relax, aching muscles or just decompress. But history wasn't always that way. Vapor baths have been described as similar to a modern-day sauna, with unknown vapors that claim to cure all kinds of ailments. Sadly, the Victorian-era bath ended up burning more people than actually curing them. Next up, we have the crocodile feces bath. The Greeks and Romans apparently found the best way to fight wrinkles and lines was by collecting the feces of the crocodile and having a bath in it. Apparently, it reduced aging to quite an extent. I'll stick with my Epsom salts and Lush bath bombs. Thanks! In 1st place, we have methods of obtaining pale skin. I'm very grateful that my snow white complexion is quite natural, thanks to my German-Irish mutt heritage, but for those who wanted it, here are some ways not to do it. Going back to using olive oil for everything, apparently if you combine it with white lead, it can be used to lighten the skin tone. Although this made people's faces visibly lighter, the women who did this were also subjected to death by slow lead poisoning, which was, absorbed into their skin. Lead lead used to be used for a lot of makeup, and while it was efficient, it was also pretty dang deadly. Speaking of deadly, around the 6th century, aristocratic women, in a haste to develop that pale, death-like pallor, which was very famous in those times, used to drain their bodies of all their red fluid, one drop at a time. Well then, that explains why everyone was so weak and tired all the time. But geez, don't waste that elixir, make sure you're donating it to your friendly neighborhood vampires. A common way to remove freckles and tans and achieve that flawless pale complexion was by using lemon juice mixed with sugar and borax on the face in the 1890s. And once again, for that eternal facial glow and skin bleaching, more modern women would wear a face mask taped to their faces while they slept. I would never be able to sleep if I tried that. In less lethal practices, those geisha women I mentioned before used rice flour powder based paste as a foundation. Hey, now that's something I feel like I could try and not risk my health with.
Number 10. Public latrines. Starting this list off, we're going back to the Romans. Do as they do, right? So picture a modern day locker room, just all sitting beside each other. But toilets. Yeah, gross. But social. And everyone helped each other. Yeah, whenever you're done with that little sponge thing there, Patroclus, throw her on down, buddy boy. Thanks. Take your time. Yeah, in ancient Rome, public latrines, aka public washrooms, didn't have toilet paper, or seats, or hand soap, or separators. Just sitting on a church pew, shoulder to shoulder. Yeah. Worst part, you would just sit and share a stick with a sponge thing stuck on top of it. You would all share the sponge. It's tradition, right? They did this for like 1,000 years. Said it built confidence and social skills. Dude, I can't even go to a urinal with someone sitting beside me because I'm shy, let alone sitting next to each other, showing each other's pictures from the cottage weekend, talking shop in front of 10 people. Hey buddy, you mind just scooching over there? Yeah, it's gonna be a messy one. We ate a lot of figs earlier. Thanks.
Number 9. Feed the dead. Since we're on the topic of ancient Rome, let's dive in with a couple of libations. Yeah, we love libations around here. Throughout history, libations have been offered to the dead. Honor those who have passed, right? One of these. Pour one out for the homie, right? Where did this come from? Well, this is a tradition that we still see today, but it began, of course, in the ancient world. It began in Egypt and other parts of Africa, and of course, ancient Greece. Those are the main three right there. Pour one out for the lad, but in ancient Roman tradition, they would actually pour the wine into their resting place. How amazing is that? Just a nice snorkel for the dead. Romans crafted these lead or wood tubes during their lost comrade's burial. They would have it included. So afterwards, it's a one-way trip to the afterlife. You're not spilling anything on the ground. Nobody gets left behind in celebrations, even after death. I love it. I could see how one would think this is a little unnatural, but I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't getting any ideas right about now. Yeah, after I go, just dump a bunch of iron brew down the pipe. I'll be good. I'll be strong as in the next life.
Number 8 in our countdown is my favorite pun yet. I put that on everything. Except quite literally. Egyptian doctors used human and animal excrement as a cure-all remedy for diseases and injuries. According to Eber's papyrus recording in 1500 BC, animal feces such as donkey, dog, gazelle, and fly were all celebrated for their healing properties and considered to ward off bad spirits. While we know that Egyptian medicine was incredibly advanced, even having doctors who were specialists, you can't help but question this logic. However, like with most things the Egyptians did, technically they weren't wrong. Research shows that microflora found in some types of animal dung contain antibiotic substances. So sure, you risk some tetanus, but you could also be cured. Lizard blood, dead mice, mud, moldy bread were also all used as topical ointments and dressings, and women were also sometimes dosed with horse saliva as a cure for low libido. And speaking of a woman's libido, man, did the Egyptians have some crazy women's healthcare going on. Number 7, we'll call the fertility games. I have a newfound appreciation for modern medicine after learning a way our ancient Egyptian friends tested fertility was by placing a garlic or onion clove inside of a woman's. This is because ancient Egyptians believed that all orifices of a woman were connected, kinda like subway tunnels. Anyways, if the doctor could smell garlic on your breath the next morning, then the tubes were clear and the woman was fertile. But if the doctor couldn't smell garlic, then the tubes were blocked and it was assumed that the woman couldn't give birth. Once you are pregnant though, you can find out the sex of your baby in another bizarre tradition, popping a squat over some barley. Why? Because if it barely grew, then the baby was a boy. If the barley grew like crazy, then the baby was a girl. This test was believed to be highly accurate, and they weren't wrong in that. Turns out the test was actually accurate in 70% of all cases. And in 1963 lab testing, the urine of a pregnant woman did cause the seeds to sprout. Since she was in fact pregnant with a girl, it's likely the seeds start to grow faster due to elevated levels of estrogen, which stimulates growth. I can think of some
truly hilarious ways to integrate this into a gender reveal party. But kids aren't for everyone, and that's okay. Ancient Egyptians were notoriously not fans of them, so let's talk number 6, safe sex. There are actually lots of stories of Egyptian contraceptive methods, but don't get too fascinated because these aren't anything you want to try and recreate. Egyptian women would collect the dung of crocodiles or elephants to mix with sacred herbs and honey. They would then apply this paste mixture to their vulva and up inside the vagina as a protective seal on their genitals. Okay, men, don't think you're getting much better though, as your contraceptive was to rub onion juice all over your junk. If neither of these worked, which shocker if they didn't, the Egyptians had an herb called silphium, which was used to help devoid a woman of an unwanted pregnancy. They even knew what has been confirmed today, that achia gum from an achia tree worked as a spermicide and would reduce the likelihood of pregnancy after the fact. While it's impressive they figured out what they did, this whole section just has yeast infection written all over it, so let's just keep going for everybody's sake. Number 5, let's reuse, reduce, and recycle our rotten food. More questionable cure-alls. As I mentioned in point number 8, moldy bread was used by doctors for medical reasons such as medicine or gauzing techniques. This is because Egyptians, from what we can gather, seem to have figured out the antibiotic properties and believed the exposure of mold to a wound would better aid in the immune system for next time, if not at least help quicker healing process this time. But Egyptians also reused other rotten foods. For example, sour milk was also used medicinally. Believed bathing in it would help with skin disease or dryness. I mean, all that sand is bound to have a little bit of a chafy effect. Honey, which also happens to be a natural bacteria killer, may not have been rotten, but it was put on open wounds similar to how we use polysporin today. And while rotten donkey liver may not have been medicine, the Egyptians were quick to slather it on their head and get a nice even dye job. Number 4 in our countdown is a different kind of rotten, the casual neck. The Egyptians were known for their fascination with life, death, and sex. In their beliefs, the god Ra actually created the universe and the first 2 gods through masturbation. Osiris, another god who eventually came along, became father to Horus posthumously after Isis had sex with his dead body. Ra also had sex with Osiris posthumously, but it seems his use of onion juice worked pretty well and he didn't father any children with the dead body. Now, just because it's in their godly pantheon doesn't mean just anyone was necrophilic in ancient Egypt, but those who were may have had that lust arguably feeling a little more justified in their pursuit of rotten ladies. So, there was an issue with necrophilia towards the deceased bodies of Egyptian women, to the extent that their loved ones began a habit of letting their corpses sit out for 2-3 days before passing them to the embalmers, so as to dissuade sex. The logic was that the embalmers wouldn't want to have sex with the body that was already beginning to rot. I mean, they shouldn't want to have sex with the body in the first place, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Regardless, embalmers were apparently common enough for the Grecian writer Herodotus, who famously documented a lot of culture practices, to make special note of. Let's take a break from the funky stuff to talk about a different kind of pussy. Number 3, the obsession with cats. Guys, I am super biased to this one. Don't know if you can notice the fine sheen of cat hair I rep, but I'm with the ancient Egyptians on the cat praise. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with cats and even worshipped them. Believed to be gatekeepers of the underworld, these little beasts were spiritual and metaphorical symbols for Egyptians, and they were even believed to be gods themselves. The act of harming, eating, or killing a cat warranted a death penalty as a result. And while adoring your family pet isn't bizarre, the effects of worshipping something are. When the family cat died, every member in the household would shave off their eyebrows to mourn its death. And if a building was burning, people would save the cats before they even put out the fire. Being the first society to domesticate cats, Egyptians used cats for extermination aside from the companionship, which worked so well that their agricultural society dominated that of the Mediterranean for hundreds of years. Of course, there were cons to this obsession. For example, when the Persian invaders showed up using cats as shields, the Egyptian army retreated in fear of killing a cat, allowing the invaders to slay their soldiers and the pharaoh and take over rule of Egypt. Oops. Unlike other animals, cats were often mummified and buried in tombs dedicated to the goddess Bastet. Recovered cat figurines made of wood, stone, and bronze can be found in museums and collections all across the world. Number 2 is a modern day medical emergency, but to ancient Egyptians, it was just his time of the month. While it's astounding that medical accomplishments that Egyptians had made, specialized doctors, antibiotics, even surgery, you can see from their contraceptives in point 6, Egyptians didn't always nail it. In fact, the disease schistosomiasis we'll just call it by its second name, bilharzia, was so common that they didn't even realize it was a disease, and it infected nearly everyone. How did it slip under the radar though? The side effects of the disease make people feel sick, and it caused blood in their urine and fecal matter. Seeing as menstruation also came with bloody urine and feeling sick, Egyptians simply thought they were menstruating and came to accept that men had to do the same as women. Blood and urine became a normal part of growing up for boys, and Egyptian society was already very big on gender nonconformity, even having records of sex changes, so this really wasn't outlandish thinking to them. In reality, bilharzia was actually parasitic worms having a field day in their junk. Irregardless, a man peeing blood was even treated as a sign of his fertility. No better sign a man was ready to father a family than being infected with parasites. Man, what a trip this countdown has been. You may be wondering what can take the cake. It's the ceremonial circle in at number 1. So as prior mentioned, ancient Egyptians believed Ra to have created much of life and existence through, well, his masturbatory sessions. This was also believed about the Nile River, Egypt's famous river that flows 6,600 kilometers before it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. These ancient Egyptians believed that the flow of the river represented the frequency of Ra's ejaculations. Seeing as the Nile was the source of Egyptian agriculture, it was incredibly important that that flow remained. Well, it's 4000 BC, and everyday people don't exactly see their gods wandering around, so with their pharaoh being the personification of God, the duty fell onto him. So once a year, in the last month of summer, during the festival Min that celebrated the pharaoh's rule, the pharaoh would approach the Nile, remove his robe, and masturbate over the Nile River in a sacred public ceremony. He had a large retinue of men that would also into the river at the same time as him. Once the pharaoh and his men had, well, finished, any man was welcome to unload in the river too. It was believed that these cultural and religious practices would ensure that the Nile would continue to flow for the next year to come, pun intended.
Number 10. Saving your pee-pee. Back in the day, whole families, monasteries, and public meeting places would collect the pee-pee deposited in chamber pots throughout the day. Yummy! They would take the amassed forbidden lemonade and either donate it, or if they were feeling enterprising, they could sell the wee-wee to the town tanner or fuller. You see, the warm yellow liquid was used for the process of dyeing textiles and in the tanning of hides. Oh, and it was also used for cleaning clothes. Screw the smell of Tide and bounce dryer sheets, I'll take the smell of wetting the bed and Grandpa's favorite chair, thank you very much. Urine was also used by physicians at the time to tell the health of their patients. I do this too. You know when it's clear and you feel like you're the most hydrated guy around? It's nice. I definitely don't taste it like the physicians back then though, or Saul Goodman in season 5 of Better Call Saul. I'll stick with apple juice for my favorite yellowish drink, thanks.
Number 9, belladonna, or commonly known as deadly nightshade. Now, what would our medieval ancestors be doing with such a lethal ingredient? Well, truth be told, it had a few uses. One of the more strange was for beauty. Belladonna had this strange effect on the pupils. The consumption of belladonna through eye drops, or a liquid, would result in dilated pupils, which for a long time in Europe was considered to be very beautiful. At least, it was considered beautiful. I don't know if that really is. The trouble, well, it's poison. It's like if you were complimenting me on my summer-ready body. Except I told you my secret was drinking Drano. To my surprise, however, this is an ingredient you can find today in certain medicines combined with other ingredients. In small doses, it makes it not harmful. I thought it would be fun to talk about all the side effects as fast as I can. Dry mouth, dry skin, inability to sweat, muscle spasms, blurred vision, enlarged pupils, hallucinations, inability to urinate, talk to Adam, convulsions, seizures, coma, acid reflux, fever, rapid heartbeat, gastrointestinal infection, high blood pressure, constipation, and more urination problems. Adam's the guy you need to talk to for that.
Number 8, column wars. So while the Greeks were going head to head with the Turks, they were fighting over their independence. Now the Greeks had the upper hand at the Acropolis one day. They were surrounding their enemy, everything was going great, they had this stronghold in their grasp. And the Turks at the same time were running out of ammo and of course options. They then began to break apart the marble columns around them. Yeah, just smashing them to bits like it's Minecraft, just to try and get lead from inside. Now, as the Greeks witnessed the destruction of their Parthenon, they panicked. They were like, please stop. They said, here, take our ammo instead, but don't break our columns. And they did. They took their ammo, continued the war, the 1821 Greek War of Independence. Yeah, here you go, Ottoman Empire. Take this lead. Now we can fight. Let's do it officially. I'd be like, take the columns. We're getting out of here. Peace. Number 7. Zombies? Question mark. Yeah, it doesn't matter the context. Zombies are always scary wherever you drop them in history or culture. Whenever we talk about ancient Egyptians, we break down the process of mummification, and that I miss. Just keep everything in jars, keep everything separate, safe in the middle of a tomb. No zombies coming back to life here. No way, Jose. Well, ancient Greeks, they actually believed in zombies in some way, shape, or form. They had steps that they would take to prevent the dead from ever walking again, which is, okay, terrifying to say out loud. Archaeologists found graves where bodies were actually weighed down with rocks, or they'd be pinned down to their tombs, again, to prevent them from leaving after death. Why is that? Why are you doing that? They weren't called zombies at the time, obviously, but rather they were called revenants. Reanimated corpses that returned to terrorize the living. Nice, sounds a lot like a zombie, doesn't it? Yeah, I agree. Dr. Solosky Weaver explains that bodies found at a cemetery near the ancient town of Camarina in the southeast Sicily, they were feared to come back to life. So the town was once a Greek colony, of course now modern day Italy, but it's home to a 3rd century cemetery with around 3,000 bodies. And more than half of them were buried with coins. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend digging up anything, but just know there's some treasure and zombies possibly lying around you at every waking moment. Cheers. Number 6, stone cold. When the pandemic first began, one of the hardest things to get a hold of was toilet paper. I don't know, everyone decided to their pants or something all of a sudden. It was chaos for no reason. It's pretty important, I guess. When you run out of toilet paper, you often remember that moment for a little while. Regardless of where you are, you'll remember that forever. Start looking around for towels and props. You're like, all right, how am I gonna get out of this sticky situation? Leaves of 3, let them be. That's all I'm saying. But ancient Greeks, they did things a rougher way. Ancient Greeks would use these small ceramic pieces to wipe their bottom. Yeah, ceramic to wipe. Ow. French anthropologist Philippe Charlier expands on this toilet hygiene history in the British Medical Journey. These flat terracotta discs found in these ancient sites had residue on them. Residue like, yeah. Also, what a lousy find. You're like, oh, I found an ass wipe. I found an ancient ass wipe. Nice, I'm gonna put that in my pocket. They also discovered a Greek cup which said on it, 3 stones are enough to wipe one's arse, which is pretty funny. 3, really? I'm like, guy, I'm like 8 or 9 minimum. Number 5, naked exercise. This next one, look, I'm not saying it's unusual, but maybe I'm on board with this one. I don't know, it looks kind of fun. You ever forget a towel when you shower? You gotta do that naked silly run through the hallway. You feel like a goblin, you feel like Bigfoot just nude in your hallway. That's my favorite run. I feel like the alien from Signs just walking around, just very lanky, you know what I mean? Ancient Greeks used to work out like that. They used to walk around sweaty and naked and then lift some weight. The word gymnasium translates to the Greek term gymnasion, which meant at the time, school for naked exercise. Fun fact right there. Xavier's school for gifted youngsters or Ezekiel's school for naked exercise? How do you pick, right? 50-50. Just don't set up shop behind the guy doing squats. That's gonna be a bad time in the ancient gym. Number 4, wine time. When we think of ancient Greeks, we think of wine and parties and I guess now naked exercise. Sorry about that. But was it really a drunken festival of love all the time? Not really at all. Ancient Greeks actually rarely drank wine without diluting the hell out of it first. The water to wine ratio was 4-to-1. So yeah, you'll be hydrated, that's for sure. Regular Joes would drink at taverns and the rich would throw these big lavish house parties. And some things stayed the same over all these years, but ancient Greeks believed that drinking undiluted wine could cause blindness or insanity. Yeah, I think that's just called blacking out, my friend, but who knows. Number 3, human sacrifice. All right, these last 3 we're gonna get pretty weird. We found the remains of a 3,000-year-old skeleton in Greece, and they found the skeleton on the side of Mount Lycaon, which historians know is the site of animal sacrifice for Zeus. That's a fun place to be. We'll set up a picnic not there. Ancient writers mention this site and how human sacrifice was also at play. And thanks to technology, we can confirm that this is indeed the case. The upper part of the skull was missing and the body was laid on 2 lines of stones with stone slabs laid on the pelvis. So yeah, doesn't look really natural if you ask me. We look at Greece, of course, as the birthplace of philosophy, democracy, and 100-meter hurdles, all that good stuff. But they also did some sacrifice stuff, apparently. Yeah, you don't really learn that that in school, don't you? Science has allowed us to look all over the world as well, not just Greece. Ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, the Mayans, oh my god, this one was huge. After Mayan ball games, the losing team would be sacrificed. That would suck. Those are some high stakes right there. I would kind of love to watch that game. That's pretty crazy. Number 2, Greek statues. We've all done it at one point, we gotta admit. You're at a museum, you see a big statue, it's massive. This warrior represented has like 16 abs, he's made of bronze, he's 8 feet tall. The amount of detail got into their body is jaw-dropping, it's impressive. And then you see what they got here and you're like, why is that so small? Why'd they make this part so small and your abs are so big? Did you know ancient Greeks would make their, you know what, small on statues on purpose? Yeah, men who were well endowed, if I can say that, they were more often than not foolish in history. They only ruled for lust. So if you had a big brain instead of a big you were the talk of the town. Ladies would whisper about you as you passed them. Whenever an actor would play a fool on stage, they would be given a comedically large, you know, setup. That's how you knew that he was the villain or the fool back then, because he had a big, I guess. The way we see these statues today meant that they had self-control and intelligence, and it wasn't always about this, right? So whenever you see a big dude with a little statue, that's how you know. He was very noble lad there. Number 1, the Battle of Marathon. Every New Year's, there's always that one guy on Facebook who just becomes a runner. He has the squirt water belt, the whole shit. They train for a marathon, they do it, they tell you about it, they remind you every single day in the office. What is a marathon? Was it a person? Is it a name for 42 kilometers? Well, it was actually a battle back in 490 BC. It was a battle between ancient Greeks and Persian invaders sent by King Darius. Now the Persians arrived to Marathon, about 20,000 of them, and they arrived to punish the Greeks for supporting the Lonians, who revolted against the Persians. Now the Greeks were outnumbered, but they attacked hard and fast. They took out 6,000 Persians and eventually they just fled entirely, which would have been my plan from the start. Pew, see ya. The number of Greek fighters lost was around 200, so far less casualties. The story of Philippides came to be at this time. He ran the first ever marathon. He ran all the way from, well, the place Marathon to Athens to deliver messages. And that distance was, you guessed it, 42 kilometers. He was one of the Greek military men known as day-long runners. He did 6 marathons back to back every day. Yeah, my knees hurt just reading. We gotta get out of here. They're gonna buckle below me as I'm reading this list.
We're gonna start with how hippopotamuses love you too. One thing that many people don't realize is that the creature that kills the most people in Africa each year, quite literally their most dangerous creature on the continent, is not even a carnivore. It's the hippopotamus, as featured in that annoying Xmas song and that early 2000s Canadian commercial that had us all googling if house hippos are real. To really drill my point in, hippos are the only creature that actually ever scared Steve Irwin. Now, while they may not live on the Nile River anymore today, they certainly did back in the days of ancient Egypt and were sometimes considered a bad omen because of how dangerous they were. They could easily swamp boats, drag people under and drown them, and out of sheer aggression, they could maul people to death with their huge mouths and teeth even if they had no interest in eating them. As proven by King Tut and King Menes, who both got smoked by these animals while possibly out hunting them, which is something the upper class occasionally did. Call that immediate karma. But deadly creatures could be on a smaller physical scale. Rats and bugs. Most diseases that afflicted the ancient Egyptians, which they also happen to have very little protection from, were transferred by pests. Those who lived near the marshes used nets to protect themselves from the mosquitoes, netting around beds, doors, windows, you name it. They also had DIY pesticides for their homes, a solution of natron or daubid and debit, which is like a crushed charcoal. This mixed powder rub protected them from epidemics and vermin alike. The ancient Egyptians thought that the main reason for the pestilence of the year, which must be the prehistoric term's flu season, was the time of year when dryness and cracking of agricultural lands caused rats to surge up from it. It's also said that the papyrus Sililiaire III, that on the 12th day of the first month of winter every year is when disease season began. Obviously they made the connection: when you see rats, you've got fleas, and when you've got fleas, you've got plague. In ancient Egypt, the fee of bringing a doctor was very expensive. It could be a copper ingot, a set of vessels, or even, servitude women. This means that when the poor got sick, they would not be able to afford the doctor's fee, and as a result, life expectancy was no more than 35 years for the peasant, while the higher classes lived longer, reaching their 80s and 90s. Love saying this next one's name. It's Pumapulco. Stats: where? Tiwanaku to La Paz, Bolivia, when, somewhere around 500 CE until ? Strengths, precision carving and advanced architecture. Weaknesses, being accused of having aliens help. Fun fact, in Amara, Pumapunco means the door of the puma. Pumapunco was a city already abandoned when the Incas conquered the area in 1470. Predating that, we have no idea who built it and what happened to them. Alright, segment done. Moving on. No, not really, but could you imagine? Yeah, no, so it was already empty when the Incas came there, and they spared no expense incorporating Pumapunco and the rest of Tiahuanaco City into their empire, believing it to be the place of their deity of creation, and where that deity created the ancestral people of all ethnicities and sent them out in the world to populate the respective lands. So, Incas believed the fallen stone portraits near Pumapunco to be the models of those first humans from the creation myth. These stone figures, however, are just depictions from the city's former rulers. The exact origin and age of the site is endlessly disputed. As archaeologists know, Pumapunco was a thriving ancient town originating from somewhere around 500 to 600 CE, and it's got mankind's most incredible stonework. Each is cut in such a precise way that they fit together perfectly and lock into each other. Not even a razor blade can slide between them. Naturally, their perfection is all the evidence ancient alien believers need to grab the tinfoil hat. May recognize this next name, it's Etrurias. So, stats time. Where? Central Italy. When? 800 to 250 BCE. Strengths, construction enterprise, iron and copper trade, urban planning. Weaknesses, poor army, territory desirable to invaders, and locality to Rome. Fun fact, the Etruscans invented the idea of armed and contact sport, or as we more commonly know them to be, gladiators. The civilization reached the height of its power in the 6th century BCE when 12 city-states were allied to be the Etruscan League. Being the first real major settlement on the Italian peninsula, Etruria became the basis of the civilization in late antiquity to follow. They were one of the first peoples to dispose of kings and be ruled by the intelligentsia of aristocrats and magistrates, and their architecture and construction techniques arguably influenced the Romans as much as the Greeks did, as did the city's overall build and stylization. Even the Latin alphabet and the Roman toga have their origins with the Etruscan people. The growing Roman military juggernaut found Etruria too good to pass up, and their League of City-States was annexed into the new Roman Republic in 250 BCE. Alrighty, we are moving on now to the Phoenicia civilization. Stats are, where? Lebanon and Israel. When? 4000 to 332 BCE. Strengths, peaceful and diplomatic city-states, maritime strength, dye and metal production. Weaknesses, minimal military strength, no real capital city or stronghold. And the fun fact is that the ancient Olympic Games started in Phoenicia. So, Phoenicia is known as Canaan in Hebrew and is named after the Phoenicians, a Greek word for purple, due to their production of the purple dye, which would later become the color of royalty and aristocracy in Greece and Rome, and actually a lot of other places. They were the greatest pioneers of sea travel in the ancient world, arguably, and were a peaceful people, never having had a civil war. Equally unknown to many, they are credited with the founding of Carthage, a city that would actually become a major center in both the Carthaginian and Roman empires. This peaceful and diplomatic reputation helped them stave off invasion for a prolonged period, as did their openness to trading and befriending pretty much any nation they came across, as far as Spain and Portugal. Prior to Alexander the Great's conquest, the Persians invaded Phoenicia lands in 539 BCE, but the Macedonian invasion following that was more devastating. After that decline, the Phoenicians became a Roman state in 64 CE and developed a Hellenistic society. Shuffling our way forward, we're now doing Assyria. Stats, where? So, Iran and Syria. When? 2400 BCE to 1300 CE. Their strengths are technological advances, iron weapons, and emphasis on education. And their weaknesses, proximity to other strong kingdoms, and their administration spread a little too thinly. Fun factoid, Assyria contained several zoos as one of their kings was obsessed with animals. And not only were they the pioneers of animal domestication, but Assyrian unique policy for defeated powers was to not incorporate their people into the nation, but deport them and ensure there's no rebellion under their rule, which is literally the smartest thing I've heard from an ancient civilization. Instead of just taking the whole bunch of people, just leave them there. Exceptions were only made if the individual or group was believed to be of greater use to the Assyrians, such as scholars, because one of the Assyrians' greatest achievements was in education, as the school of Nispis is believed to be the first ever university. The Assyrians were also attributed credited with building some of the first aqueducts and arches hundreds of years before the Romans and introducing the modern idea of keeping time. The final Assyrian demise is shrouded in mystery, but it's believed they entered a dark age in 1300 after constant wars with the Byzantine Empire. After their empire crumbled, their civilization saw a mass influx of Jewish and Arabian people, and in came high taxes on the Christian Assyrians, who mostly folded under the pressure to convert to Islam. As the Assyrians were ethnically distinct from both Arabs and Jews, this effectively ended the idea of being Assyrian. I mentioned this civilization in a recent video and a little bit before. Let's regroup with the Tiwanaku. This civilization proved you didn't need an army to survive. Stat time: where? Bolivia. When? 500 to 900. Strengths: good agricultural location, construction techniques, expert farmers. Weaknesses: no writing system, overuse of their farming land, no military presence. And fun fact, Tiwanaku cities were so grand that when the Incas discovered them, they believed they were made by the gods. So, Tiwanaku had colonized both Chile and Peru. They were a multi-ethnic society who had settled in the upper reaches of the Andes and now are remembered for the remarkable monuments that still stand today, as well as their underground drainage for fresh and soiled water, paved streets, and cities that were planned in a grid system. Tiwanaku became expert farmers and pioneered a method of farming known as flood-raised field agriculture, which used an effective system of irrigation. This well-fed population of over 10,000 allowed the Tiwanaku to expand into many other areas of South America. The civilization was at its peak of its powers in the 8th century, but mysteriously ended in the 9th. No one's quite sure why the Tiwanaku disappeared, but it's believed that they, as well as other similar culture known as the Wari, were victims of a dramatic shift in climate which devastated crops and caused a mass starvation. As they had no writing system, the Tiwanaku are truly a forgotten civilization. Always a fun word to say. Minoan life is next. Stats: where? Crete. When? 3000 to 1100 BCE. Strengths: bureaucratic hierarchy, shipbuilding, knowledge of metallurgy. Weaknesses: weak military and natural disasters. Your fun Minoan fact is that the Minoans had a sport that involved jumping over bulls' horns. Of all the lost civilizations, the Minoans may be the most mysterious. Arguably the first European civilization, they first settled in Crete in about 3000 BCE and remained isolated there for literal centuries before establishing trades. Minoan culture originally had no centralized government and a flexible ruling system with large grand palaces acting as a key area of administration. Their tombs, known as tholos, were a key architectural feature along with their paved road system, running water, and pottery that were later incorporated by Greek and Roman civilizations. By 2000 BCE, kings had assumed control of the island, signaling the beginning of a bureaucratic system and social hierarchy, and women also played a large role in that society, serving as administrators and priestesses, and they had the same rights as men. It's that kind of unity that made Minoans very remarkable. But womp womp, around 1700 BCE, an earthquake rips Crete a new one and destroys most of the island's settlements. They managed to recover from this natural disaster, but now had the Greeks and the Mycenaeans threatening trade interests. Their luck got even worse when in 1375, the island's largest city, Knossos, was devastated and crippled the Minoan people, who were dispatched by an oncoming invasion in 1100 BCE. Oh yeah, ladies, homies, and gents, it's Indus Valley time. What are their stats? So where? India, Afghanistan, Pakistan. When? 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE, and in its mature form, 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE. Strengths: extremely advanced mathematics and metallurgy. Weaknesses: natural disaster, overpopulation, failed trade. Fun fact, unlike other ancient civilizations, archaeologists have never found any evidence of palaces or temples in the Indus Valley, which suggests that there were no priests or kings. The Indus River Valley civilization of 3300 to 13 BC was also known as the Harappan civilization. They were important innovators, but little is understood about the Indus script, and as a result, little is known about the Indus River Valley civilization's institutions and system of governance. What is 100% known is this was likely the most advanced ancient society there had ever been. So, what could have made it end? Historians believe things start to fall apart in 1900 BC, and by 1700, many of the Indus Valley cities had been abandoned. Trade was very important to their civilization. Their main trade partner was Mesopotamia, and around the time the Indus cities started to fail, Mesopotamia was going through huge political problems and their trade networks collapsed. This would have had a big impact on work, thus money, so some historians think this is what collapsed the Indus cities. Alternatively, Indus civilization collapsed because of changes to the geography and climate of the area. Movements in the Indus River may have changed the direction or war caused flood. The main cities were closely linked to the river, so changes would have had a terrible effect and driven everyone out. And last, but never the least, we've got Vinca. Last stats round. So, our where is Serbia and Kosovo primarily, but also Bosnia, Romania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Greece. When? From 5700 to 4500 BC. Strengths, cultural uniformity and metallurgy, and also being insanely advanced. Weaknesses, not trading enough statues. Last fun fact of the video, they were so modern, their houses, clothing, and jewelry are all stylistically incredibly similar to ours now. Vinca culture and its people begin in the mid-6th millennia BC when the second wave of migration came to the Balkans from the shores of Asia Minor to create the largest Neolithic settlement in all of Europe. Research and analysis of artifacts and the settlements revealed that a culture and a community of people that had actually had a very advanced way of life for the time. Until this day, no weapons have ever been found during excavations, and it makes us draw the conclusion that they were not warriors but peaceful and gentle. Remains of houses show traces of insulation against elements, and inside houses were intricate multi-room layouts and water systems. Finding decorative ceramic cups and sophisticated tools all speak to a relatively comfortable lifestyle, as does the mini dresses and the shorts and the fitted pants and skirts and the dainty jewelry. Possibly the most interesting find is the presence of copper objects and metallurgy, which date from well before the Metal Ages began. However, it's the same copper that caused the disappearance of the Vinca culture. While people out here made fortunes on the jewelry and the tools of copper, others used it to make weapons and seize their treasure. As the people of Vinca were painfully peaceful, the downfall then began.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Olmec colossal heads. The Olmec civilization has often been referred to as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, and from somewhere between 1400 to 400 BC, the civilization rose in the Mexican Gulf Coast. Now, over 2 millennia later, in 1862, a farmer was digging that very same land that they once lived on, and he came across an extremely large stone head. From here, research continued, and this turned out to be one of 17 stone heads that are thought to have been portraits of the rulers at the time. The statues are all somewhere from 5 to 10 feet tall, and they are extremely heavy. Like heavier than a full-grown elephant. I guess that's how we're measuring weight now. Some use imperial, some use metric. I use elephants. The reason it is believed that these stone heads were made to model rulers of the time is because they all share similar features, but they are each made with different expressions, slightly different facial features, and different headdresses. While the first discovery of the stone head was close to the source of the basalt stone that was used to make them, most of the heads are like 60 miles away from there. So we have absolutely no idea how these ancient people were able to make these stones. We just know it wasn't an easy task by any means. In our number 9 spot today, we have the works of old men. The works of old men are structures that were first observed from the air by a British pilot in 1927, and they are located near the Azraq Oasis in Jordan. There are hundreds of these wheel-like structures that are each over 80 feet wide, some even as large as 200 feet. These huge structures have been dated back so far that they might just be the oldest man-made creations that we have ever found. While this is all amazing, we have absolutely no idea what they are or why they were created. The theories range from things like sun tracking to cemeteries to some sort of spiritual relevance, but we really just aren't sure. While things like this are incredible finds, and it's amazing that some of the first man-made things still exist on our Earth, it is so crazy how we have no idea what they are or how to use them, and unfortunately, especially because of the fact that it's been thousands and thousands of years, it's most likely that the mysteries surrounding them are totally lost with the past.
So, how else do you conquer horrible bug? Why, by shaving every part of it. It was incredibly hot in ancient Egypt, and running showers only cameoed later in the dynasty. For this reason, finding ways to stay cool, stay hygienic, and also avoid awful pests like lice was very important. So, ancient Egyptians shaved their heads and the rest of their bodies clean, and we don't mean just the women either. Having smooth oiled legs, arms, and torsos became the Egyptian beauty standard for both sexes. Even for any women or people hearing this who know what it's like to shave more than the 4x4 inch face radius, it can be ridiculous to imagine the chore this must have been for everybody. Shaving your entire body regularly without modern razors, electric trimmers, wax, all while avoiding infection or scrapes on your skins with no water to help. This is where wigs come in. A lot of folks wonder how wigs have become so normalized in our world, and ancient Egyptians, really quite a few African continents, are the answer. They could be taken on and off, keep your head cool, and they can be tossed into a barrel to be soaked, cleaned, and deloused and worn again. again. And while I am on a horrible bug roll, worms. Anyone else in Canada forced to read that weird book in high school called The Troop with all those boys stuck on the island with the evil parasitic body infesting worms? No? Nobody? Alright, well, while I go to therapy for those nightmares until I'm like 108, let me plant a brainworm on you. Back in the days of ancient Egypt, they didn't have the kind of footwear choices we have today. Most people only had very basic sandals and shoes for their everyday work and travel, so foot problems were common, and there were ones that were more than just stepping on some shattered pottery or some burnt tootsies from hot sand. Wading into water for whatever, whether it's work, a bath, even just for fun, they had the risk of a schistosoma worm getting into their feet and then wreaking havoc on their internal organs, weakening the immune system. Or there's the Genea worm, which would hitch a ride in your nose or mouth, travel through your body and eat a path down your leg muscle and lay eggs in them as it goes. They could also get regular old hookworms as well, which could cause iron deficiency, anemia, and all kinds of other love symptoms. Perhaps they should have used some of that magic ancient technology and made more protective footwear, so I don't have to think about this for the rest of my night, but no. Okay, so that was awful. Instead of things that were consuming the ancient Egyptians, how about something they would consume? Sand. Lots of sand. And dude, it effed their teeth right up. Many of our ancient Egyptian videos mention of the incredible innovations Egyptians had in regards to their teeth. They were known for being one of the earliest cultures to use both toothpaste and toothbrushes as well. But this can give the wrong impression. This wasn't a fun little vanity invention, but one of necessity. Sure, they practically had no sugar in their diet, let alone acids, but ancient Egyptians lived in an extremely sandy environment, as we all know. And since they didn't have the insulation and other vacuums and things we have today, the sand was pretty much everywhere in everything all the time. So yeah, ancient Egyptians were always getting grit in their food, especially their bread, which was the most common thing they ate. This, along with the regularly enjoyed beer, also full of sand, led to some really bad dental problems that they were constantly trying to find solutions for, such as their braces, tooth removal, infection care, and naturally toothbrush and toothpaste invention. And why not wash all that sand down with a whole lot of flood water? Egyptians actually recorded, measured, and tracked the Nile River, and to do so they created their own series of measurements, the Nilometer, and a governmental cataloging system that could track the Nile patterns through the centuries of information, the Palmero stone. While the blessings of the Nile were many, there were such a thing as a little too much. Too high of a flood could destroy dikes, irrigation work, settlements, food stores, and livestock, increase epidemic diseases, and endanger seed stocks. Low or short floods didn't always reach some of the farmlands, which then as a result reduced the wetted area, the degree of soil saturation, and the amount of fertile silt deposited. But it would increase the salt concentration of the waters reaching the fields along the desert margins. This all reduced the cultivated area as well as the unit productivity, whether too wet, too dry, or too salty, and resulted in food crises ranging from food shortages to straight famine and plague. And naturally, the agriculture and fields were always the first affected by floods, which would immediately affect crop quality, its quantity, and thus income. Some theories mention that the decline after dynasty and at the end of the Old Kingdom occurred because of food shortages and famines, resulting by the flow inundation. In the Tale of Two Brothers, when inundation confines the men and beasts within doors, the younger brother seats himself at the loom and weaves. Why? Well, this is my smooth segue into talking about how blue collar carried all, as it still does nowadays. Shout out to my blue collar workers, you're seen, essential, and loved. Anyways, to paint a picture, let me read a short segment of the instructions of Duakete, which dates back to the Middle Kingdom. The field hand cries out forever, his voice louder than the raven, his fingers have become ulcerous with an excess of stench. He is tired out in Delta labor, he is in tatters. He is well among lions, but his experience is painful. The forced labor then is tripled. If he comes back from the marshes there, he reaches his house worn out, for the forced labor has ruined him. This is just one of the many very fun literary resources that detail the haggard existence of the Egyptian blue-collared field. There was even an ancient Egyptian papyrus found, and it turns out it's a letter from a scribe of Amun-Ra listing reasons to his son why he should become a scribe and nothing else because everything else sucks. In describing the miserable life of a herdsman, it said that they were all worn out with constant toil, bad food, and the dank air of their habitat. Lived near marshes with his cattle. He had no settlement, home, a misery, lonely reed hut sheltered him at night and held all his worldly goods, a rush mat to sleep on, and clay water jar and basket for his head. head. Sometimes the Nile would flood as discussed and destroy a farmer's whole career. When summer came and the fish left, fishermen had to find new jobs. When drought arrived, artisans and clay makers had to shift focus. To survive, you had to be a master of all crafts, but with a limited education. Thank God you're only struggling to eat, fighting disease and climate disasters, all while getting taxed out the wazoo. So, biographies of the Middle Kingdom tombs shed light on the tax collecting activities of nomarchs. While an important administrative text, the Papyrus Brooklyn deals with the forced labor. From this we know until the first millennium BC, taxes were paid in the form of grain, cattle, and other commodities. The first coinage money is introduced in the 26th dynasty. Government officials regulated the yearly taxes, and the officials' main function was to ensure that the peasants paid their taxes either by persuasion or even by physical force. Taxes were not based on how much acre that had been produced that year. Remember all that Nile measuring? Surprise! Taxes were based off the result of inundation. Each year, the agricultural census officials were sent to measure the croppable area and gather a list of the institutions and private owners who held that land. This enabled them to estimate the year's crop and probable tax. Once the crops had begun to grow, other inspectors returned to make the final tax valuation. Don't pay your taxes? Well, security will swing by with switches, a type of painful stick bundle, and punish you. There were many reasons for not paying taxes. The harvest or the tax itself is stolen from you, too low of a harvest, crop spoilage, and political instability. In the late period, there was also another solution to pay tax or overdue loan, which means to sell yourself for labor. And what do you know? Just like nowadays, unreasonable tax led to heavy corruption, aka royal profiteering, everyone's favorite, and Egypt was full of it. In the case of the whole erecting pyramids and 30-foot self-statues, if that wasn't distinctive enough. Following Hasheput's death in 1458, Egypt's only interest was profiteering, backed by the constant threat of violence. Nothing was done to create a sustainable system of provincial government. Instead, a teetering hierarchy of greed, nepotistic officials, and priests squabbled over positions and power. They memorialized themselves and advertised their family's greatness in corrupt expenditures, much like the prodigy houses of the Elizabethan England 3,000 years later. One such official was Rekhmire, vizier to Thutmose III and his son Amenhotep II. This swaggering bigwig, who literally wore a big wig to prove his status, built himself an extravagant memorial chapel at Thebes and a monument showcasing his status, paid out of the profits of the high office. Because internal theft was endemic, a consequence of staggering inequality pervasive in Egypt at the time. Of course, there's no point in judging a Bronze Era nation by the standards of today, but in Egypt, the gap steadily widened as the elite abused its power. Egypt's kings and high officials happily took from other nations and even each other, and kings defaced or demolished their predecessors' monuments, absorbing their achievements, and sometimes even helped themselves to rationalize grave robbing. And where there is corruption, there are spoiled nepo babies. Many, well actually most of Egypt's kings pretty much popped out of the womb and were sat on the throne. The 18th dynasty is one of the most notorious for this, fathers seemingly dropping like flies and their young sons taking over. But despite literal children taking the throne, the system of divine myths surrounding the royal line was so embedded it allowed such young kings to rule unchallenged. War profits were mostly spent on conspicuous waste, but helped create an illusion of permanence. State vanity building projects were designed to glorify the regime as part of that mirage. Amenhotep III built a sprawling palace complex on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, with courts and pylons fronted by colossi depicting himself. At Karnak, Hasheput erected several obelisks honoring herself and Amun, her divine father. Khufu, son of Snerfu, decided to one-up his old man and commissioned the Great Pyramids of Giza, one of the last standing 7 wonders of the ancient world. Pepi II was only 6 years old when he became king of Egypt, and he behaved exactly as you would expect a 6-year-old to. An explorer told him that he had found a pygmy, and he ordered the man to bring it to the palace so he could see for himself. His attitude never changed with age. He was the one who used to cover his servants in honey and make sure that the flies wouldn't bother him that way. And don't forget Ramses II, who was completely obsessed with making a name for himself, building multiple cities in his name, a museum called the Rassinium, and he would even quite literally scratch out the names of previous pharaohs and write his own on their accomplishments. The guy was so childish after horribly losing the Battle of Kadesh to the Hittites and barely escaping with his life and being forced to sign a peace treaty, he had a massive mural commissioned showing his miraculous triumph.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have ambrosia. Said to be the drink of the Greek gods with a flavor of honey, this beverage was delivered to the Olympians by doves, and this is what gave them their immortality. This is an important substance in mythology that is seen many times. Sometimes in the stories, people were given the privilege of drinking it, like in the story of Heracles, but sometimes others would try to steal it, and like we learned before, do not anger the gods or else you'll find yourselves punished like Tantalus, forever trapped, hungry and thirsty he's standing in a pool of water he can't drink, under fruit he can't eat. Some mortals in the stories were only teased with the possibility of immortality, just to be turned away at the last second, like the hero Tydeus. He was going to be made immortal by Athena the goddess, but then she caught him eating human brains, so she decided, probably better to not. Mythology is weird. I didn't make this up. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Holy Grail. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far. The Holy Grail is one of the most well-known pieces of Christian mythology. It is said to be the cup or bowl that Jesus drank out of during the Last Supper. Of course, people were trying to get their hands on this relic, and to make it even more revered, it is said to be the vessel in which Joseph caught his blood while he was on the cross. That's heavy stuff, and it's the reason why King Arthur and his knights traveled in search of the Holy Grail. Here's the catch with this thing though. Only the purest souls were able to grasp it, and not many of us can admit that we're the purest of souls. This is why when only one man was able to touch it, it is said that he gained immortality through it. If that was me, I'd tell him to prove it. I mean, real easy to say it when you're the only one who can touch it. Just saying, proof or it didn't happen. Legend says the guy's still eating Mr. Noodles out of it to this day.
Number 8. Blonde hair. The image of the Viking as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed warrior is prolific and also wrong. While the majority of Vikings were observed to be blonde and described as such, this was actually due to an extremely early application of hair dye. That being said, this wasn't solely due to fashion, though blonde hair was considerably valued in Viking society. The method in which Vikings dyed their hair was through the use of lye, which contains potassium. Potassium can often strip the pigmentation off of hair, and if Vikings washed frequently, which they actually did, they were weirdly hygienic, then it would lead to their hair gradually being dyed blonde. A side effect of this was that lye was also extremely toxic to lice, which helped prevent outbreaks on ships. Number 7. Torches. Moving straight from hygiene to whatever this is. Starting a fire is extremely hard. You'll see two guys rubbing sticks together in the movies and suddenly fire appears, but you know what? That doesn't work at all. The conditions for friction alone being enough to start a fire have to be absolutely perfect. The right temperature, the right humidity, the dryness, all of it. So this is why people decided to find other methods for starting fires, such as flint, a material that is fairly easy to find wherever you go. But with flint, you also need tinder, and this is where it gets a little weird. It always gets weird with tinder. The Vikings had a particular species of mushroom that they'd use for their torches, which they would carefully prepare and then boil in their own urine. Well, because, and it's honestly more likely that they found this out through trial and error, they probably didn't actually know the chemicals and all this, urine contains sodium nitrate, which burns real good, as it's a chemical neighbor of potassium nitrate, which is found in gunpowder. This was actually a fairly common technique for creating torches at the time, and, you know, just really cool. If not, like, you know, really weird. Number 6. The 81 Yule offerings. Christmas is coming, and if you're a Viking, that usually isn't a great thing. Not because of the Norse gods or anything, Vikings were actually pretty quick to pick up Christianity, but more because Christmas was the time where a pretty brutal ritual would take place. Specifically referred to as Yule, the ritual was estimated to have been in honor of family members that had passed away, and generally involved singing, dancing, and killing 81 men to offer their heads to the gods. Merry Christmas! Number 5. How to ward off Draugr. Draugr, for those who didn't play Skyrim, are a Viking denomination of the undead. It's presumed as a certainty that when a person is buried in the ground, they will rise from the dead as a Draugr. From there, they'll attack people, and everyone will generally have a bad time until the Draugr is killed via decapitation, dismemberment, or any act of making it just not move anymore. To prevent this from happening in the first place, Viking land burials were done extremely carefully. Straw would be placed under the body and scissors would be laid on the chest, while their toes were sewn together and nails were pushed through their feet. They would then deconstruct a portion of the house and take take the corpse out through it, reconstructing it later, as Draugr were believed to follow the path back from their place of burial. They would then be entombed, and all of the items they'd owned that remained in their house would be turned upside down until their grave was magically sealed. Number 4. Berserkers. A denomination of shamans, berserkers were warriors trained to fight and channel various spirits into their body. There were 3 schools of berserker: the wolf, boar, and bear, each one serving a slightly different role. To train, these berserkers were sent out into the wilderness to become more in tune with nature, and also drive themselves insane in the process. This would supposedly imbue them with the strengths of their respective school of combat, and so when they were called upon to enter into Norse conflicts, they were supposedly given the ability to transform into their respective animal, ripping the opposing warriors to shreds. This account is shared both by Vikings and the victims of Vikings, though it is more than likely that this is just an exaggeration meant to imply the bestial behavior of a berserker when in a trance. Number 3. The Blood Eagle. This one is not for the faint of heart. A ritualistic form of execution, the Blood Eagle is an extremely violent method of dispatching enemies, which is described in the sagas. For a long period of time, these were thought to have been fictional, but as recent bodies have been unearthed that appear to have been victims of the Blood Eagle, there seems to be more truth to this than initially thought. The Blood Eagle involves the victim being laid on their front and a knife being used to separate their ribs from their spine. The spine is then removed and their lungs are spread out in the form of crimson wings, creating the eponymous Blood Eagle. Number 2. The Bloat. The Bloat was set as a ritual that would occur once every season at 4 set intervals in a year, but another could be organized if circumstances required it. The most well-recorded bloat was one performed by Sigurd Håkonsson. Detailed by Snorri Sturluson in the saga of Håkon the Good, this ritual involved a massive amount of human and animal sacrifices, as well as sacrifices of weaponry. Blood was also collected and splattered on the walls, altars, and participants. A feast would then be had and toasts would be made, first to the gods and then to the fallen. Number 1. Viking chief cremation ceremonies. We've all heard of Viking cremations, how they load their dead bro onto the ship and sail it out into the ocean, sending a flaming arrow into it so that they might be buried at sea. However, if it was a chief that died, things would get a little bit more screwed up and nasty. First off, one of the chief's girls would then volunteer or be volunteered to join the chief in the afterlife. She would then be made to get mad drunk and then would be made to sleep with every single man in the village.
Number 10 is the Pet Patrol. Do you guys remember the scene in Disney's Aladdin where he steals a piece of fruit and miraculously evades capture? Well, in real ancient Egypt, our prince wouldn't have stood a chance, as police in Egypt used baboons to catch thieves. Incredibly intelligent, these animals were able to be trained, which paired with their speed and ability to jump to places that are difficult for humans to reach, made them the perfect crime fighters. Baboons could also easily remember the face of any thief, as they are ranked 3rd in the animal world for their memory. So don't go relying on any luck to get away with anything. Outside of their police duties, they were treated incredibly kindly, but trained to participate in picking fruit, making beer, and even dancing. Baboons were so beloved by Egyptians that some mummies were later found to have tattoos of baboons on their bodies. In ancient Egyptian mythology, baboons are best known for their association with Thoth, the god of wisdom. However, they were linked to many other gods as well. Definitely nothing like Babu in Aladdin. But wait, did I say tattoo? Well, being inked up is no modern phenomena. Number 9 is tatted up tuts. Egyptians join indigenous, Nordic, African, and many other cultures of having a history of tattooing. Now, Egyptian tattooing was bizarre just because it was exclusive to only women. By tattooing in public regions of the body, the tattoos were intended to permanently mark the woman's association with religious worship, or on the flip side, they could also be used to symbolize the lower class and the mark of a dancing girl or a That's what also makes it so bizarre. We can't really figure out why it was only women, what they meant, or what they symbolized beyond the vague generalization I just gave you. Tattooed mummies dating back to the 11th century dynasty have been found by archaeologists, some with religious symbolism, other with dots and swirls located on the lower chest, the abdominal, and the thighs. Some mummies were believed to have been tattooed with medical symbols, potentially to treat ailments. Although the meaning of ancient Egyptian tattoos may be unclear, it seems evident that they had an array of implications and that women of many different social classes chose to wear them. Baddies. Speaking of things we can't understand, thank God though, because it all came at the price of celebrity status. And yeah, it's still a price if your social rank remains that of a gutter rat. Your reminder that gladiators, no matter how esteemed, were lumped into the social ladder with working girls and heretics. Though often dismissed as uncivilized brutes by Roman historians and aristocracy, traditionally the gladiators won massive fame amongst the lower classes. So much that a name was coined for their ancient fangirl gaggles, ludiae, or training school girls, coined by Juvenal once again. Gladiator portraits graced the walls of many public places. Children played with gladiator action figures made of clay, and the most successful of fighters even endorsed products like today's app. Many women wore jewelry glazed in their blood and mixed some of their sweat into some of their cosmetics. I'll dare any one of you guys watching to walk onto an NBA court and try and get some LeBron sweat for your next face mask. We know that gladiators were private citizens with a life sentence, people overwhelmed by debt, criminals, and occasionally free men attracted to the arena by promises of riches and honors. They never lost their community connections though when becoming a gladiator, and those who managed to make a killing at it, pun intended, have been documented to heavily give back to communities they came from, free enslaved individuals, and support the economy. One of the ways they could do that was brotherhoods, because anyone who wasn't nobility had a pretty good sense as to what the Roman day-to-day was like, so they knew if everyone was already against them, their class, and had no intention to raise them above said stereotype, then howdy doody, they'll just support their own lives and economies while the royal ladies fetishize them and the royal kids admire them. Yes, regularly they would be throwing down in life or death combat against one another, but gladiators viewed themselves as a kind of brotherhood and often took it upon themselves to organize into collegia, with their own elected leaders and chosen protector deity from the wide pantheon of available gods. When a warrior fell in battle, these groups would ensure that their comrade received a proper funeral and grave inscription honoring his achievements in the arena. The same can be said for grievous injuries. Pooled union money could go towards a surgery or recovery or medicine of dire need. If the deceased had a wife or children, they would also see the family receive monetary compensation for their loss. This tradition protected their own, their community, and the fallen. And as you could guess, injuries and fatalities are pretty common in a battle of contrast. Gladiator battles had a lot of overlooked details and facets that don't bleed over into common conversation. You can have a whole conversation about what gladiators would wear while duking it out with his enemies without understanding why. It goes back to one word, tradition. Shocking, seeing as it's literally in the name of the video. The Romans liked a battle of contrast, matching a heavily armed and armored man against a lightly equipped and more barren opponent. It's supposed to be like some Tom and Jerry, one big broody type throwing everything he can, including the monkey wrench, at the lighter, smaller man who runs in circles around him. I am essentially telling you that the Romans set up their death games similar to how we set up cartoons. Yeah, I am. Big plot device came from all this blood sport lunacy. Chunky, slow moving. You sure you don't want some veggies there, Barley Boy? I'm just kidding. Also, gladiators are dead now, so I can't hurt their feelings. Besides, Barley Boy was a real title for the cranky tough guys. Researchers who studied 2,000-year-old skeletal remains of 67 gladiators were able to test them for certain elements, including calcium and zinc. Using scientific method of isotopic analysis, they can reconstructed the diets of the gladiators and discovered that they ate a plant-based, carb-rich diet that included barley and beans, very little animal protein. They also drank calcium supplements made from charred plants. Unlike the modern-day vegan who follows this kind of diet out of ethical motivations or being raised by the nothing tastes better than thin generation mom, gladiators evidently did it for pragmatic reasons. The diet was so curated and consistent that even with different dishes and spices, their diet was consistent enough to be called, you guess it, tradish. Love the puns. Gladiators fell into eating a lot of simple carbs to boost subcutaneous fat, which helped increase their survival chances in battle. Because of this fatty cushion, their blood vessels and nerves were better protected in fights. Whether or not they knew all the big sciencey words to explain it, I couldn't tell you, but they clearly picked up on it. That's what made this become such an indoctrinated diet for the gladiator. It was consistently proven to work, be efficient, and produce results. Besides, meat was for the rich anyway. Thankfully, gladiator medicine evolved after Greece fell to Rome, meaning it was time for some Greek training. The Roman gladiatorial games were a far cry from the Olympic and theatrical pursuits enjoyed in ancient Greece, but the Greeks played an important role in preparing gladiators
gladiators for their violent contests. After their incorporation into the Roman Empire, the ancient Greeks quickly carved out a little niche for themselves in a multitude of professions. Greek philosophers were employed to educate the sons of wealthy Roman aristocrats, merchants took advantage of the Pax Romana to sell their goods far and wide, and the chefs and bakers got to really blow some sandals off. For Greek athletes and physicians, Roman rule offered other opportunities. Gladiators, who required training and medical care, and the Greeks had the requisite skills to provide them. Their role might have been similar to that of a strength and conditioning coach employed to help modern athletes today. By this time, the ancient Greeks had spent centuries refining their strength and conditioning practices for the Olympics and other games, so the Greek trainers were perfect for this role. They understood kinesiology, diet, regime, all the things that gladiators had been lacking before them. The most comprehensive primary source on gladiator medical care comes from Galen, a Greek physician, surgeon, and philosopher who in 167 AD returned to his native city of Pergamon to work as a physician to the gladiators of the High Priest of Asia. According to the historian of medicine, Vivian Nutton, only 2 gladiators died when Galen was operating in Pergamon, whereas 60 had been killed in the tenure of his predecessor. Galen's experience treating wounds and sometimes dying gladiators provided opportunities for medical discoveries. He disproved Aristotle's assertion that the heart was the seat of the reason by observing a dying gladiator who sustained mortal wounds to the heart remained lucid until death. And while having a robust body may save your life, a pretty face sells the case. There were several types of gladiators, the distinctions based on the type of weaponry and tactics, but the most beautiful gladiators were held in high esteem. When the opponents for a gladiator were chosen, their beauty was taken into account. Ugliness ruined the lustuous fascination with viciousness, while beauty simultaneously emphasized the pain of mortality. Real artsy-fartsy, these Romans. The Retiarius, a gladiator fighting with equipment resembling that of a fisherman, was the least armed combatant in the arena, armed with a trident, a dagger, a net. A Retiarius wore nothing but a loincloth, a belt, and a minimal amount of armor. He was considered inferior to other gladiators, literally dubbed unnecessary to kill, and there was an aspect of homosexuality and effeminacy to his appearance and role in battle. He was to represent the ardent love of soft masculine beauty in Roman Greece, placed in the plight of human disgust and sin. Thus, Retiarius would stand out in battle but not be crucial to it. Since Retiarius is not really high on the list of gladiator discussion piles, I'll leave you with Satire 2 and 8, wherein writer Juvenal described Gratius, a man who disgraced himself by becoming the male bridegroom to a horn player. Not the disgrace here, but Juvenal was a massive hater and everyone knows it. A lot of sexist tirades. However, that marriage, like said, was not the embarrassing moment. It was when he fought by choice and effed up his one job as Retiarius, which was to throw the net at the guy. He missed the throw like an effing idiot and was forced to run for his life. Even Gratius' opponent was ashamed to be fighting him. Here's a crazy one, name based off defeat. Hey, to cut all the preamble and get right to it, they literally named all their categories of gladiator types after places they conquered. That's it, that's the show, pack it up, and good night everyone. These gladiators would then fight with some Romanized versions of their traditional weapons and fighting styles, and were sometimes also given a gladiatorial category due to being ethnic themselves, as it was a great way to show off how un-Roman you were when chosen to be an opponent. In creating gladiators of this type to fight for them, the Romans tried to mark out those in the ring as different than them and more deserving of the humiliation of fighting for others' entertainment. So let's learn about a few categories. The people of Gaul, which had roughly covered modern France and Belgium, proved to be a formidable foe to Rome, as demonstrated when they plundered the city in 390 BCE. They were feared by the Romans until conquered by Julius Caesar, and then Gaul became deeply integrated into the empire and as being a wealthy province and provided many members to the Roman elite. So the gladiator was actually renamed the Murmillo to reflect the changing attitude later on. Another type of gladiator was called the Hoplomachus, and he was modeled off the hoplite, the quintessential soldier of the Greek antiquity. They were equipped with a sword, a spear, and a round shield. The Romans encountered the Thracians, who lived in the southeast Balkans between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, and to the Romans they were wild and savage, so they modeled that gladiator, the Thrax, as such, with a small rectangular shield, 2 leg greaves, a curved simcar, and a bunch of other weapons. Emperor Caligula was fond of appearing as a Thracian fighter. In his case, it's hard to know if he picked that type as an ethnic connotation or because they were just super cool and scary. And last but never least, who is surprised to hear that traditionally women got the short stick? Literally, they were given short sticks sometimes. Why? Even though we have a very limited history of female gladiators, it can tell us that they were hardcore B-word brawls that put men to shame at first, and transitioned into a spectacle more on par with 2 sorority girls jello wrestling in bikinis. Female gladiators are gladiatrix in modern language, while ancient texts referred to them as Ludia or Molières, weren't as common as their male counterparts, but they did make their way into the ring. They were highly sexualized. Female gladiators only wore loincloths as opposed to the tunics men wore, and they were not given helmets, presumably to show off their faces and hairstyles. Fights featuring female gladiators represented the pinnacle of luxury and indulgence, often present at private parties held by the Roman elite. Unlike their male counterparts who were often forced into the gladiator life, it's believed gladiatrix chose to fight for financial gain, honor, spite, or fame. Although evidence to support the historical existence isn't vast, it's compelling. Written and archaeological records have survived, including a marble relief and funerary items. One statue, believed to depict a female gladiator, features a bare-chested woman holding a sika, associated with a type of gladiator known as the thrax. Further substantiating the history of female gladiators is a law that barred free women from participating in the arena games if they were 20 years or younger. The creation of this law was seen as an inadvertent recognition of the fact that women had been participating already. Male gladiators, however, kept hacking away at each other for another 2 centuries before the last recorded gladiatorial contest occurred in 404 AD. The fight between these two women, the goddess Achilles and the queen of an Amazon warrior tribe, survives as an interesting example of a serious female contest. An ancient marble relief, now in the British Museum, naturally, shows that these two women fought well and respectively and were both granted their freedom at the end of it.
Number 10. Construction. We can't talk about ancient Egypt and the mysteries still unsolved there if we don't start on how the hell these things were built. And also, it's not just like 3 pyramids. There's 118 of these things. When did they have time to construct all of these? Ropes? Pulley systems? Yeah, I'm not convinced. Ramps? Ramps would have been a mile long against the pyramid's height. That's like hundreds of years right there. You ever dug a hole in your backyard? 2 feet. It's like 6 hours right there. And a sore back. Some have theorized a water hydraulic system was used to transport the carved rocks up slopes and tubes with tidal power. Okay, better. But like, how did they line up the rocks so perfectly and so square at the top? 1 inch off and every carpenter knows that's gonna shift everything. Also, the alignment to true north, the odd coincidences with the dimensions resembling the cosmos, they couldn't have known back then, you know? Buckle up, it's only gonna get weirder. Number 9, Chamber of Secrets. In 2017, scientists were able to peek inside the Great Pyramid finally using modern day physics. Particles, actually. What they found revealed numerous hidden secret chambers and rooms that were thought to never exist. The most bizarre discoveries was a massive unknown void nearly 100 feet long that lays just above the pyramid's grand gallery. Khufu, also known as the Great Pyramid, was received the most attention due to its size and age, but it wasn't the only chamber they found. Now, gold, mummies, manuscripts, ancient technology, what lies inside these voids? Also, how the hell did they floor and roof a room that's inaccessible? How do you build that inside such a small chamber already? Muon tomography uses cosmic rays of muons and generates a 3D image through nearly any material. This technology is groundbreaking, literally. Yep, found it, there it is.
Okay, a break from sad lady facts. For number 8, let's cover warrior women. Yeah, now that's more like it. So, from the northernmost tip of the border with Asia, plenty of ancient European armies were happy to welcome women into their ranks. But historians always agree upon one exception where the army and navy were almost 99.9% men. Can you guess who it is from the title of the video? Women may have been banned legally from joining the army, but your average Roman soldier would have seen their fair share of female combatants, as well as their own women on the home front. Professor Valentine J. Belfiglio shared that Roman women were capable of close combat as well. Not only were they frequent competitors in gladiatorial shows, but they, like the women of the clans fighting against the invading Romans, were known to take up arms in warfare, albeit in a non-official, unsanctioned capacity. History tells of a few of these women, such as Cloelia, who in 506 BCE freed herself and 20 others from the Etruscan camp and swam them home through enemy spears. For her courage, the Romans erected a bronze equestrian statue with the heroine seated upon it. Belfiglio notes, on the highest point along the sacred way. When the Carthaginian general Hannibal was invading, women and men inhabitants fought valiantly, and they burned his siege engines together. Hannibal would later face and lose to the honored Busa, who aided Roman fugitives from his war regime. So, in summary, women may have been banned legally from joining the army, but your average Roman soldier would have battled against and sometimes besides women despite that. The name game! It's number 7 in the countdown. Women, like a lazy boy chair, an ice maker, or owning a cat, were possessions in ancient Rome. And so, like the college roommate who complained if you moved their toaster 2 inches to the left, they put their name on it. Not in a label maker fashion, more so in a recycle fashion. From the moment of their birth, women were viewed under male authority. Therefore, the name of a baby girl would be close to her father's. For example, Claudius may have a daughter named Claudia. Augustus Augustus becomes Augusta. Constantine, Constantina. Okay, so maybe the rule was just whatever the last letter was, swap it to an A. Ironically, this is why a lot of women's names end with an sound. Talk about making historical waves, seeing as our society still inherently perceives names with that ending as sounding feminine. As the empire grew older, women in the ancient Rome were granted more freedom, often by sheer number of children they bore. 3 children could allow a woman to become independent. Independence meant no more naming your kids after their dad, which isn't fair anyways because I'm sorry, but who carried this kid for 12 months and then had to push it out? Thus, daughters started being named after goddesses, their mothers, their aunts, and plants. Anyways, number 6, once you were old enough for baby time, you were married off, and when that happened, you donned a stola. In my recent video, the top 10 messed up marriage traditions in ancient Rome, I explained the Roman marriage ceremony and also the garb worn. The flammeum was an egg yolk yellow veil worn by brides that they would lift from their face and hair in preparations for vows, to instead fall down on their shoulders and biceps. This placement of the veil signifies her donning the stola. The stola was a type of long overlay. Sometimes it was in the form of a dress itself, but oftentimes it was an additional soft and light drape of material. It was worn by married and respectable women and was also associated with modesty. For those who could afford it, a stola with decorations around its neckline was available. This trim could be patterns, embroidery, beads, and motifs. When initially introduced, the stola was a preserve for the upper-class patrician women in the early republic. But over time, the right and then the absolute expectation to wear it extended to the lower-class women. The pala, a rectangular shawl, was also worn over it as a cloak and draped over the left shoulder. Any women who were convicted of adultery or were working girls or actresses were forbidden to wear a stola in public. Part of what dictated the stola, however, was number 5, the stupid Oppian Law. So, in 215 BC, the Roman men who were overtaxed passed the Oppian Law, named after Gaius Oppius, the tribune of the plebeians who instituted it, and it was passed 1 year after Rome's catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. To summarize it in the laziest terms, Oppian Law was initiated by a group of poor people seeking revenge against the wrong source. Instead of trying to coup their government for the taxation, they lashed out at women and their already minimal freedoms. This new Oppian Law limited Roman women's allowance to ½ an ounce of gold and prohibited them from wearing dresses, multicolored garments, or anything with purple borders, as purple dye was very expensive. It also prohibited women from riding in a carriage except on a long journey, pregnant or otherwise. 20 years after it's imposed, Marcus Fundanius and Lucius Valerius, the tribunes of the people, brought a motion to repeal the Oppian Law. Noblemen came forward hoping to persuade or dissuade them. A crowd of both supporters and opponents filled the Capitoline Hill. The matrons and maids of Rome, whom neither council, shame, husband, and father's orders could keep them at home, proceeded to blockade every street in the city and every entrance to the forum. As the men opposed and came down to the forum, the women tried to reason with them to let them too have back the luxuries they had enjoyed before. The Republic was thriving, and that everyone's private wealth has increased with every day. When the speeches for and against the law had been made, even more women poured into the public the next day when the vote was to be cast. Together, they besieged the door of the Brutuses, who were vetoing the decision to repeal the law, and they didn't stop until the tribunes changed their minds. The women of Rome, as a collective, forced the men to repeal their biased law. Number 4 is a bit of a strange one. It's what's best. Wealthy Roman women didn't believe in breastfeeding their own children. Instead, they handed them over to a wet nurse, usually a prisoner or a hired free woman who was contracted to provide this service. Soranus, the influential author of a 2nd century work on gynecology, prescribed that a wet nurse's milk might be preferable in the days after birth, on the grounds that the mother could become too exhausted to feed. He did not approve of feeding on demand and recommended that solids such as bread soaked in grape juice should be introduced at 6 months. Soranus also pointed to the possible benefits of employing Greek wet nurses, who could pass on the gift of her mother's tongue to her charge. Did he think that she would be able to give language through breast milk? You know what? Never mind. This flew in the face of advice from most Roman physicians and philosophers who always suggested that mother's milk was the best for both the child and the mother's health and moral character, on the grounds that wet nurses may pass on, not kidding, their crappy flaws or personality to the baby. These same men also usually pitched that women who did not feed their own child were lazy, vain, and unnatural, and only cared about possible damages to their figures. The hatred of women was very real. Alright, well, let's get away from the terrible medical beliefs of ancient men, number 3 will be the OG hair extensions. Historical evidence from Pompeii suggests hairdressing shops known as torresos existed. It makes sense. Roman women did have certain hairstyles expected of them based off class or marital status. E.g., unmarried women put their hair up in woolen bands when going out and added a gauzy hair veil to boot. While single women were expected to have their hair up, it doesn't mean it couldn't be styled. They pepper in braids, twists, and curls. More noble or prestigious women could arrange their hair more elaborately in various styles such as long curls and waves. The curls would be made by dipping tongs in fire. Cool, right? But one specifically weird little tidbit is that brunette, ginger, and raven hair Roman women had a fixation with blonde hair. This interest was caused when Roman warriors brought back captured women from France and Germany and quickly became incorporated into the imagery of their gods and goddesses, who oftentimes had dark hair or the more heavenly and revered color of ginger before this point. The Roman ladies would dye their hair blonde with pastes and powders in order to copy the blonde hair of their working girls and captives, but the color would eventually come off as they hadn't figured out the chemical composition to permanently bleach hair yet. To solve this vanity issue, the hair of the blonde working and captive girls was chopped off so Roman women could wear it as wigs. Might as well make number 2 all about the Roman face mask then. Why? Because it was gross. Just so gross. Y'all ready? Homegirls back in the day made face masks composed of sheep's wool soaked in a soupy paste mixture of animal placenta, excrement, and urine, as well as sulfur, abrasive oyster shells, and bile. Who's bile? God, okay. And this is before you'd whiten your skin, another trend started by the arrival of the pale French and German captive girls. They did this with lead, dung, and whatever marl is. Want to reduce wrinkles? Get out of Canada, or anywhere under the crown, because the Roman women would kill swans, which is a crime under British rule, and use their fat. This was all part of Mundus Muliebris, which translated it means women's world, a reference to women's fineries in the ancient Roman world. This would include face and skin care, but also dresses, jewelry, hair care, all described in Latin literature by the famed Cicero, who noted it alongside Mundi Omatam, aka the ordered beauty of the world, and Kale Omatas, celestial adornment. See, there's some non-deprecating writing on Roman ladies. Good job making it over to the very low bar there, Cicero. Seneca, not so much. The depressing dude was quick to blasphemize makeup and say it led to the decline of Rome. And of course, for number 1, we will visit Sappho on Lesbos Island. The Greek poet Sappho, who lived from 630 to 570 BCE, lived on the island of Lesbos, just off the west coast of what is now Turkey, and composed poems that live on in infamy to this day, as she speaks very openly about her homoerotic attraction and even implied intercourse amongst women. These poems are mostly written from the perspective of herself as a character, but what did the Greeks and Romans think of this? How could these poems be so widely adored that they're remembered to this date? So, like I've mentioned, men wrote Roman history, so they weren't particularly interested in what women got up to when men weren't around. As a result, we know little about same-gender relations of women in Rome, but what we do know is telling. The Greeks and the Romans as a society, of course, recognize that some people are more interested in one gender over another, but the general consensus was not to assume this preference was a fixed aspect of a person's identity. Instead of thinking about gendered attraction in terms of genders a person was attracted to, the Greeks and Romans cared about the role a person took during the act of intercourse with an individual. For some Romans, a same-gender relationship between women was the most confusing thing imaginable, as well as a little bit disturbing. They had trouble comprehending the possibilities of the relationship given that neither of those involved a man and could naturally take the male role. Layman's terms, these empires believed the act of intercourse was a free adult man proving his masculinity by dominating the territory of an inferior person. If there was no man involved, then there was no real intercourse happening. Therefore, women having relations, let alone extramarital affairs with one another, wasn't something men needed to worry about.
In 10th place, we have how to cure hair loss. So while technically this is a top 10 list, I might be cheating that a little bit today. When I was doing my research, I came across so many different ways throughout history of attempting to cure hair loss that I knew I just had to share them with y'all. So there was no way I was gonna limit myself. Let's start off with 50 BCE Rome. So Romans who experienced hair loss tended to rub myrrh into their scalps, which sounds simple enough until you learn that other Romans tried a more drastic remedy, which involved burning a donkey's genitals to ash, which was then mixed with the urine of the person losing their hair and applying that mixture to the head. Moving on to Egypt. Donkey hooves, dates, and dog paws would be ground together, mixed with oil, cooked, and rubbed on bald heads as an ancient remedy for hair growth. A medical script known as the Ebers Papyrus offers a different recipe for Egyptian hair loss, mixing fat from a hippopotamus, crocodile, male cat, snake, and ibex, which is then applied to the scalp. If that doesn't work, the follow-up solution is to boil porcupine hair and apply it to the bald areas for 4 days. Finally, in ancient Greece, if women were going bald, they sometimes used a hair mask consisting of a mix of feces, urine, and menstrual scarletness. Okay. Hippocrates endorsed a mix of pigeon droppings, opium, horseradish, beetroot, and spices as an ancient remedy for hair growth, while Aristotle recommended goat urine as a treatment instead. I'll pass on all fronts, thanks. In 9th place, we have separating lashes with a safety pin. This is probably the most modern trick on today's list, and it comes courtesy of film star Audrey Hepburn. She liked to darken, plump, and lengthen her lashes like the best of them, and she had one trick to ensure that her lashes looked naturally fanned out and clump-free, and it wasn't, some sort of magic mascara wand. After applying a layer of mascara, her makeup artist, Alberto De Rossi, would take a pin and meticulously separate every single lash. Just for a fun little reference, the upper eyelid alone has an average of roughly 70 to 150 lashes, making that undertaking quite the long and possibly, dangerous process. To prepare for the undertaking, it's recommended to curl your lashes first to make things easier. One must start at the base near the waterline and pull the pin through to the top, separating, each individual lash. So this defines each lash, as well as helps to distribute the dark mascara pigment more evenly. Once you complete the first eye, repeat on the next, and then proceed to your lower lid lashes if you'd like. I'll stick with an overall lash brush, thanks, and my reliable false lashes. That's good enough for me. As much as it hurts to yank out the occasional lash from lash glue or liquid latex, at least I'm not risking, stabbing my eye. Trust me, I'm a heck of a klutz.
Number 8. Boot and rally. The old boot and rally. Drinking beers from a stinky old used boot. The old shoey. Yeah, I've played some rugby over the years. I've drank a boot or two for a nasty try, and let me tell you, when your 6'8" flanker has athlete's foot, probably the most disgusting tradition that we probably shouldn't let live on. The boot and rally started from military origins. Soldiers would celebrate or initiate each other by drinking a full beer from a fellow comrade's, or even if you're lucky enough, the general's boot. Yeah, after, of course, it had been worn all day, fighting battles. Can you imagine what you'd step on, in, and over during a battle or war? That's pretty gross, dude. Just so hot and stinky and wet from the muck and mud, and it's your turn to enjoy a crispy Molson out of a size 13 wide with trench foot? Yeah, I'm good, thanks. No, I'm full. Not to be confused, of course, with puke and rally. That's, also hand in hand with each other, They go together, like spaghetti and meatballs. The old puking from drinking out of a shoe and then drinking some more until you puke more. Tradition. Skull!
Number 7. Crummy wine. Nice, I love drinking wine and then immediately having to chew. That's lovely, let's talk about that. My favorite part of a wedding has to be the speeches, or the toasts, right? Whatever. I love watching somebody improv their way through an important wedding speech. It's a train wreck, always. They're always way too long, way too personal, or just sad. Throw a joke in, I don't know, maybe a pun, wouldn't hurt. But where did this all begin, right? Back in the 1800s, only men were allowed to give these toasts, which is hilarious. It was always the oldest friend, the groom, best man, father of the bride, you name it. The whole thing would have been done in 8 minutes, I imagine, because guys suck at speeches. At least from what I've seen. A lot of ums. Wedding toasts go back as far as the 6th century BC. When Greeks were getting married, the father of the bride would drink the first glass of wine to make sure there was no poison in it. What an OG. Romans would drop a piece of burnt toast into the wine in order to make the wine taste less bitter as well. Yeah, hence the term toast. Yeah, wine was so bad back in the day, they had to use burnt toast, Crystal Light, just to make it better. Okay, cheers. That's it.
Number 6. Handshakes. We all do it. Meeting the in-laws folks, about to smash a job interview, usually starts with this. Hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. But after living through this pandemic, why do we still do this? Well, the handshake has existed in some form or another for thousands of years. One popular theory is that the gesture began as a way of conveying your intentions of peace. Lots of loyalty issues back then. Empty hand means no weapons. Some suggest that the up and down motion of the handshake was supposed to dislodge any knives or loose, hidden up the sleeve threats. The other explanation is that the handshake was a symbol of trust, and that I give you my germs, you give me your germs. We both trust each other, hands meet in hands. Now, add a little bit of spit or some blood into the mix and we got ourselves a real bond there, brother. The bacteria from one person to another person would be shared and mutual. Disgusting. In ancient Rome, the handshake was even used as a symbol of friendship and love. Oh, that's nice. A pair of clasped hands even appear on the ancient Roman coins, signifying peace. That's a good one. I like this. It turned from gross to nice all of a sudden.
Number 5, wet willies. And immediately back into the gross. Here we go. I'm already angry thinking about a wet willy. I've gotten a few in my life and I'm still mad at all 3 of them. Whoever thought of this, like, yeah, I'm just gonna suck my finger and then put it in someone's head, put it right in their ear canal. Freaks, disgusting. Keep your coffee breath away from my good ideas. This weird tradition slash prank slash gross hobby all began back in 1864 in, of course, England. You guessed it, that's the origin of the term, and it all started when a wet, salivated finger went in the ear of an English fisherman named, you guessed it again, Willie. What if I said Brian? You'd be like, what the? Wet William, we could do that. A wet Walter. Ooh, that's a bit too serious. Everybody laughed at this point, okay? This changed the game. It was like the moonwalk. Everyone was like, what did he just do? What happened? How did he do that? Growing up with ear problems, don't do wet willies. Wet willies are a bad idea. Digging out wax with your pinky even can create problems. If a vacuum forms between your ear and the eardrum, and then all of a sudden the sudden depressurization can damage your eardrums. And also, it's fucking disgusting, so don't do those anymore.
Number 4, blowing out candles. I just did this a couple weeks ago. So the people who ate that cake, yeah, sorry for all my germs. But it's my party and I'll cry if I want to. That should be a song. The age-old tradition of aggressively exhaling your bodily fluid and air before arguing over who gets the biggest piece. I love it. Traditions, right? However, thanks to modern medicine now, we know blowing out candles can expel virus particles, just like breathing, shouting, coughing, and sneezing. And if the person's infected, that makes it really gross. So a nice big gust of your lungs ought to do it. People believe that the smoke from the candles carry their wishes and prayers off to the gods. Good omens kind of deal. It's also thought that the smoke would ward off evil spirits and bring positive energy for the coming year. Either or, it's fucking gross and we all still do it. Next time you're about to make a wish on your special day, just remember you're spitting on a cake. Am I wrong here? Birthday to you.
Number 3, plague flowers. Speak of the devil. Historically, the symbolism of flowers has changed quite a bit. Flowers like to bob and weave, you know? It's like, someone die? Oh, they got married. Okay, well, here's the same thing. Enjoy. There's the flowers for the centerpieces, the bouquets for the bride and bridesmaids. There's flowers everywhere at a wedding. But why is that? Well, the idea of carrying a bouquet at a wedding dates back to ancient Greece, where it was believed that carrying a bouquet was thought to ward off evil spirits. Yeah, I hate when those interrupt weddings. It's always the worst. Like, any objections? A ghoul stands up. I'm like, oh, it's my ex. I knew it. I knew he'd show up. That's just Bagul. Yeah, it's a college thing. Just sit down. He's fine. But a little later on down the line, the presence of bouquets at weddings got a little darker and, dare I say, a little more precautionary. During the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, when the Black Death was running rampant throughout Europe, folks were trying anything and everything to try and ward off the plague. No more spirits. We're just kind of focused on, you know, the physical plague at hand. See, back then people believed that smells carried contagion, so we'd fight them off by using good smells. So people would fill their pockets with fragrant things to keep the plague at bay. It's like those plague doctors with the big bird nose, just stuffed with dandelions or whatever they can find. This was later integrated into wedding practices, and brides started carrying down the aisle stinky stuff, like a bouquet of garlic or dill. Imagine having a nice dill pickle sticking out. You're like, yeah, it's the big day. All to protect them from catching a plague or two. Over the years, the stinky stuff was then replaced again with nice smelling flowers, thank God. But imagine if it stayed on garlic. What a dream. I love garlic and or dill. Sorry to all my vampire friends, but I'm going old school for my big day, personally. Just onions and garlic. I'm like, ah, it smells so good. It's so good always.
Number 2, hazing. First off, I don't condone it. Second off, I've never done it or been a part of it. Not really a frat guy myself. But I did have friends dare me to do stupid growing up. I can't lie. North America is full of colleges and universities who take part in this tradition, as they take it very seriously. If you can even call it a tradition. The hazing rituals that commence in fraternities and sororities can be deadly. Literally. There's a million scary stories that are true surrounding these challenging initiation processes, and I'd say the majority of them are sadistic and dangerous. If you have to do something that risks your life to prove that you're down, nah man, that's not for me. I got essays to write. Hazing has a history dating as far back to 387 BC with the founding of Plato's Academy. At the time, hazing was called penalism, which meant, quote, a system of mild oppression and torment practiced upon first-year students. Torment is the right word here. Even Plato criticized the practice of hazing. He's like, no, that is too mucheth. Like, I understand camaraderie and brotherhood and all, but like chugging ketchup until you're on life support? Like the school debt's enough, you know?
And finally, number 1, the monkey buffet. Okay, this last one here is a little unusual, but I want involved to have a little FOMO already just looking at this. Look at these little guys, come on, they're having so much fun. As its name subtly suggests, the Monkey Buffet Festival in Bangkok has everybody at the table. Everybody eats. Smack dab, right in the middle of the ruins of the Frag Pram Sam Yacht Temple in Laburi, Thailand, a beautiful tall banquet awaits. It's a 13th century temple just covered in fresh fruit. It looks so inviting. I'm hungry right now and I'm looking at it. I'm like, ooh boy. Thing is, I said everybody eats. That's not entirely true. This feast is held in celebration of Laburi's thousands of macaques, thought to bring good luck to the area and its people. Only the macaques eat at this festival, and yes, it can get a little messy, obviously. They like throwing food around, I've heard. They like throwing their as well, so maybe just kind of heads up, I don't know. So if you're attending, bring your own snack, or else there's pre-chewed watermelon waiting for you. That's also yummy too, if you don't mind. The macaque hair, just avoid that. We'll pull it out.
Number 10, Roman laundry detergent. So my washing machine broke this past week, which was a pain in the neck. Worst thing about it was that it broke in the middle of a load, so I had to wash the rest by hand, which made me glad we have washing machines at all. However, the Romans were a little more simplistic with their methods of cleansing the cloth. Apparently, vessels were set out in the streets of Rome for anyone to just walk up to and relieve themselves into, and once full, they'd be taken down to the local laundromat. From there, workers would mix the vats with water and pour the combo onto their patrons' clothes, proceeding to stamp the clothes until clean? Yeah, sure, clean. Number 9. The fall of Drusus. In the case of historical poisonings, it's hard to determine whether or not they were actually poisoned or just died from being old. It's usually that they're old. But in the case of Drusus, the evidence was a little bit more clear. See, Drusus Julius Caesar was set to be the heir to Tiberius due to familial relations. His buddy Sejanus would have normally been the one to get the title, but blood is thicker than water. As a result, Sejanus tried to marry his daughter to Drusus' son, but that fell through. Sejanus was still determined to become the heir to Tiberius by whatever means necessary. This led to the two infighting frequently, and Sejanus eventually managed to seduce Drusus' wife, Livilla, who aided him in poisoning her husband, slowly killing him in a way that appeared to be natural, and he got away with it. Sejanus continued to rise to power until his sudden and brutal execution, which was later revealed to be due to someone leaking the truth about his rise to Tiberius. Man, this just needs to be a telenovela.
Let's meet physicist, engineer, astronomer, inventor, and anti-circle disturber, the mad mathematician. Archimedes of the Syracuse is regarded as one of the leading scientists in all of classic antiquity. He had anticipated modern calculus and analysis by applying the concept of infinitely small and the method of exhaustion, which is a load of jargon for shapes and diameters. Archimedes died during the siege of Syracuse, and our dude Plutarch wrote this in his parallel lives on 2 accounts of how Archimedes died. According to the most popular account, Archimedes was contemplating a mathematical diagram when the city was captured, but it didn't disrupt him. Who cared? What did was the ponyboy Roman soldier demanding he come meet the emperor. Naturally, he declined, saying he had work to do. But this is a siege, you don't just say no. So the soldier just killed him, even though there was explicit rules to not do that. Another story has Archimedes carrying mathematical instruments and killed by a soldier because they thought it was valuable items. Either way, Emperor Marcellus is super pissed by his death, and he is considered a valuable scientific asset lost. As for Archie, his last words were, "Do not disturb my circles," a reference to the mathematical drawing that he was studying when he was disturbed by the Roman soldier. To this day, it's uncertain why he was actually killed. Alright, let's play the circle game! And no, not the iconic Buffy St. Marie song, as much as I'd love that. I'm talking about the super buff macho man killed on a Greek island about 2,000 years ago. So, in 2002, archaeologists are doing what they do best, digging up, and they stumble across 57 bodies in a subsection of the Thasos necropolis, including one with a nearly perfect hole in his sternum. Anthroprofessional Dr. Agalarakis said that in his 40 years in that field, he had never seen anything like it. In an attempt to determine the injury, he actually yeeted a bunch of spears at like one of those Mythbuster jelly bodies until he learned it never could make a perfect hole. So the Striax couldn't have been thrown at the man. Instead, it had to be at close range. It's a clear circular shape shape that implies the man was somehow immobilized so tightly he couldn't flinch when it occurred. He could have been pressed against a wall, kneeling with hands behind his back, or face down on the ground. It's unclear why the man was executed, but it was probably during a time of political upheavals, perhaps one of the military turmoils or reprisals during the regime change. Dental analysis did show that before the man's death, his diet worsened, suggesting he was a prisoner or a captive in his last days. One of my favorite stories of ancient Greece is the Pausanian plot. Alright, so I talked about this one in the top 10 messed up facts about Alexander the Great. Let's get more in depth. Pausanias is the dude who shanked Alex the Great's daddy-o, Philip. But Teresa, it says unsolved in the title. Yes, because we may know he done it, but we don't know the full story. We know it starts with Pausanias and Philip banging each other until Philip finds a new boy toy, who a heartbroken Pausanias ridicules mercilessly. Instead of just saying put him on the table and let's measure, the boy toy tries to prove his masculinity on the battlefield, and promptly dies. Some prick Attalus blamed Pausanias for the moron's death and decided to set him up. Paus shows up for what he thought was a feast in his honor, only to be spiked and bodily violated by Attalus and a lot of other people. Pausanias went to Philip for justice, and Attalus is sent away to Asia Minor, while Pausanias was appointed one of Philip's 7 personal bodyguards. Many believe that his decision to kill Philip was fueled by that resentment, but many people wondered whether he had acted alone or if it was resentment that was purposely fed. Olympias, the first wife, and Philip were repulsed by each other, and her resentment for Philip's newest wife may have motivated her further. Then we got Alexander, who almost immediately after his proclamation had 2 potential rivals killed and ordered the troops in Asia Minor to have Attalus killed. But I mean, Olympias did burn all the other heirs alive and give Philip's widow 3 grieving gifts, which were a rope, a dagger, and poison, so figure that out. Alexander later accuses the Persian king of arranging the killing as a way to end the threat of Macedonian hostility. All we know for sure is Pausanias did do the stabbing, but he definitely wasn't the only player. Ancient Greece produced 10 public speakers so admired for their skill and eloquence that they became known as the 10 Attic orators. The earliest of them was Adaphon of Ramius, a 5th century BC statesman, providing us with some of the first recorded instances of legal cases presented in front of a democratic jury. In the case of On the Death of Herodotus, Antiphon wrote this speech as a defense for Helos to deliver to the jury at his trial for killing Herodotus. The trial probably occurred around 419 BC. Helos was going to go visit his father. Herodotus was tagging along to release some owned people, meaning there were other passengers on board the ship with them. A storm makes them dock, and Helos and Herodotus get terrifically drunk, the lighthouse style. Helos' version of the story is Herodotus leaves the ship that night and just never returns. Next morning they send out a search party and they just never find him. So naturally, it's time to torment some poor people, because ancient Athenian law dictated that the testimony of an owned person was not admissible in court unless it had been extracted via violence. Turns out both witnesses insisted Helos didn't actually do anything, even when they folded to the pain and said Helos had killed Herodotus. They quickly recanted it and said they just wanted the pain to stop. They granted that by killing them. Outcome? This is the cliffhanger, baby. We only have the speech Adaphon wrote for Helos' defense. No record of an outcome for this case exists. And speaking of wild Athenian laws, he cheated, Your Honor. This speech, written by orator Lysias, was titled On the Killing of Eratosthenius, that's a name, and it was meant for the defendant Euphiletios to deliver in trial. The exact date of the trial is unknown, somewhere between 400 and 380. Euphiletios is characterized in speech as a noble, upstanding, elderly Athenian citizen who married a virtuous, sensual young woman. Then at his mother's funeral, Euphilios' virtuous wife is spotted by a handsome man who's her own age that I'm gonna call Erato, who then hit up Euphilios' concubine and convinced her to hype him up to the wife so she'd leave her wrinkly husband for him. Euphilios then describes how he learned of the affair from an old woman who lived nearby, nosy old B-word. He then interrogated his concubine, found out the story is true and that his wife is banging someone who actually wanted her and only her and didn't buy other women to keep in the house. Shocking. Anyways, Euphilios waited for Eratos, and when he arrived, Euphilios and his friends burst in the bedroom and killed Eratos right there on the spot. In the defense speech, he insisted that the killing of Eratos was completely legal because Athenian law at the time permitted a man to kill another man if he caught him in the act with his wife and killed him on that spot. Again, we don't know the outcome of this trial because we only have one speech that was written for it. Next up is the game of whodunit. All of Adaphon's surviving speeches were written for the defendant except one sexist disaster against the stepmother for poisoning, which he wrote for an unknown plaintiff sometime between 419 and 414 BC. The stepson suit outlines how stepmom killed her husband and his friend Philoneus. genius. According to the stepson, stepmom tricked Phil and Niece's concubine into giving poison to the husband and Phil. The concubine had always been Phil's favorite, but now he wanted to sell her to a cheap brothel, and she desperately wished to regain his love once more. The stepmom summoned the woman and became her friend, claiming that she too had lost the love of her husband and proposed a mutual solution, a potion which would restore the love of both her husband and Phil for the owned woman. Win-win for both ladies. The next time the husband and Phil convened, the concubine put the love potion in the wine glasses, which probably kills both men. The deaths were treated as suspicious, and the owned woman was apprehended and handed over to the public executioner after being broken on the wheel. The plaintiff never provides true motive for the woman's killings, however, and it's generally thought that among the classicists of the case, the plaintiff's case rests almost entirely on an appeal to the all-male jury members' fear of women, especially their fear of being killed by their own wives. In spite of this, the outcome of the trial is, you guessed it, unknown, because all that has survived of that speech is one. So, you know everyone loves a good cult. Let's check out the elusive Eucilians. The Eucilian Mysteries are a 9-day early September event commemorating the story of Demeter searching for her daughter, Persephone/Kore, for 9 days in agony after she's kidnapped by Hades. Thus, the rites during Eucilian Mysteries took 9 days to complete. From day 1 through 5, a series of purification rituals, fasting, animal sacrifices, and sacred offerings to Demeter were performed. Day 5 is called the Grand Procession. That's when everybody advances from Athens towards Eucilius on foot. Hey, Teresa, this is feeling unsolved, not crimey, just wait. The initiatives were then served a drink called kaikion, packed full of Eucilian Mysteries involved visual performances. Things were said, shown, and done, as scholars speculate that the secret involved an actual killing and essay of a maiden, a recreation of the abduction and essay of Kore and Persephone. Whatever the initiates witnessed, there are reports that there were people who were in complete shock after the mysteries, and many spoke out that they experienced a transformative vision on their fears of death. Imagine being the reason Greece falls to Sparta, Socrates has to take his own life, and you knock up the king's wife. Well, whoever defiled Hermes was that guy. The defiling of Hermes, one of the worst examples of sacrilege in classical Athens, shocked the Athenians, who immediately appealed for witnesses to come forward with any information, for which there would be substantial reward. Athenian Hermes are four-sided pillar statues, usually with the face of the god Hermes, and they sport an erect, so who vandalized these, and why? Is it irreverence against the gods, drunken vandalism, or a conspiracy against democracy? Alcibiades and his teacher/lover, Socrates, were not actually well loved and immediately fell under suspicion. In fact, Alcibiades was officially accused of being the ringleader to the crime. However, the Athenians knew they had no chance of defeating the Sicilians in the impending battle without him, so they postponed the trial and subsequent death sentence until the expedition to return home triumphant. Upon learning he's gonna stand trial and die for the destruction of Hermes while literally fighting to save these dummies, Al asks himself what the hell is he doing, and he swaps sides to the Spartans, who proceed to decimate Greece. Meanwhile, because all the other suspects are dead, they end up charging Socrates, and he literally takes his own life. So in case you've ever wondered how the ball got rolling for Sparta to take Greece and Socrates to die, well, it's because someone vandalized rock dingles, and we still don't know who. So we start off with the Khmer Empire. Like a video game, I'm gonna give y'all their stats. So, where? It's across today's Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. When? 800 to 1400. Strengths, advanced water system, strong economy, natural resources. Weaknesses, uncontrollable population, rival civilizations, overexpansion. Fun fact, the Khmer Empire only lost one major naval battle in 600 years. Hella relevant, seeing as the Khmer Empire really embraced that whole water is life thing. The civilization had an extensive water network so that their capital city, Angkor, would flourish no matter the season. Angkor was also at one point one of our world's largest cities, covering 386 square miles and accommodating around 1 million people. Very hydrated people, that is. The advanced water system contained a network of channels and reservoirs that utilized monsoon climates to collect water for use in dry season. Each area of the city had 2 channels of water running through it for fresh and for soiled, earning it the title of the hydraulic city by our contemporary historians. The gradual decline of the Khmer Empire can be attributed to 3 main factors: the diluting of their culture through too many new strands of Buddhism, a gradual weakening of their water network, and an overexpansion that brought them into conflict with the neighboring Ayutthaya kingdom. Alright, one is done now, two for you. Let's check out the Hittites. So, stats, where? Across Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. When? 1700 to 700 BC. Strengths? Expert chariot makers, iron manufacturers, and they had the fortified city of Hatsua. Weaknesses? Drawn-out rivalry with the Egyptians, city-states had no political unity, and a slow economical advancement. Fun fact, Hittite battle axes were literally shaped like human hands. Yeah, I know, right? Kinda cool. Alrighty, so these guys at their peak actually rivaled Egypt's kingdom and made them look like a bunch of backwood hicks. In fact, they were the ones who were effing up Egypt so bad, Ramses II had to sign a peace treaty with them, only after they had the world's largest chariot battle, because boys will be boys or whatever. So, how'd these guys manage to slip from historical radar? Well, it wasn't just being assumed into the Assyrian Empire, it was because, like the Khmer, their culture varied considerably between regions and became too diluted to be consistent. Also, like many other forgotten civilizations, Hittite lands were divided up into city-states with no political unity. The Hittite Empire collapsed in 1160 BC after civil war and a scramble for the throne. Scattered and leaderless, a settlement was formed between the Syro-Hittite people, and this was only for a brief respite before they're invaded by the Assyrians in 700 BC.
Number 8. Barber for a brain transplant. No, not actually. I don't think they even knew what a brain transplant was, let alone how to perform one. But in the Middle Ages, barbers were not just responsible for cutting your hair and giving monks that lovely bald thing going on top. No, they were also responsible for tending to the wounded after doing battle, taking care of the sick, and all the other medical services that the actual physicians were too good for. It's actually the reason we see those red and white spinning signs outside barbers, because it's symbolic of the bloody rags they would use to show that they could do the bloodletting required of monks in the Middle Ages. These barbers even formed a guild in the 13th century, lasting all the way up to the 18th century. Barbers are talented individuals. No one can cut my hair the way Tony does.
Number 7. Jesters. If you were to peer your nightshade eyes into a royal court, it might take a second because that stuff ain't good for you, you'll find a few things. First and foremost, you will see a king and his throne, the man who rules it all. Next to him would be a most beautiful queen, the woman who has it all. Hiding in the room upstairs are his mistresses. That's just how it goes. Loyal knights, advisors, cooks, everyone's here, as Mr. Sakurai would say, except for one missing person. Who? Me and Adam, the jesters. Oh, hi. Sorry. The jesters, the jokers. Yes, no royal court is the same without the jester. The jester's job was to just laugh. He's a ye olde comedian. Now, it might seem like it sucks, especially because, well, they wore strange attire and that hat was supposed to resemble that of an ass's ear or a donkey's ear, depending on what you want to say. But the jester possesses a unique power. No, not the power to fart on command, that's my power. The power to speak freely, or at least more freely than most. This was a time when speaking out against the king could lose your head. The jester could speak about the kings this way because, well, everything he said was taken as a joke. Some advice I think we could all take today.
Number 6. Everybody drinking. I recently went to go pick up some beers, and I went up to the cashier and I got my debit card out and prepped my ID. The cashier asked me, "How do you want to pay?" And I handed him my ID, being so accustomed to being confused for a prepubescent younger lad. He looked at me confused and said, "Nah, you're good, bro." And boom, embarrassment. This interaction would never take place back in the medieval times, because literally everyone was able to drink. It was usually the case to drink beer or wine in place of clean water. Now, they did have clean water before you all jump on me in the comments, but for when it wasn't on hand, beer and wine was accepted in its place. It was a common part of the medieval diet. I think they convinced themselves of this in the same way I tell myself it's okay to have another one. Well, it's made of grains with water, so that means it's healthy, right? Red wine is good for my heart, so drinking it right out of the bottle is okay, right? No, probably not.
Number 5. Helmeted chicken. Wind the clock back 10 years ago. I was but a humble freshman in high school. I was green behind the ears. I didn't know what to expect. Sure, people had prepped me for the worst, but I just didn't know what to expect. I got even more nervous when I saw the pretty girls showing up. Gosh, they were so pretty. Someone want to be my girlfriend? But I relaxed. I knew I was okay because at lunchtime I was going to watch my favorite YouTube channel, Epic Mealtime. Besides this one, it's a good channel, you should check it out. We're awesome. They made combinations of food that I didn't even think were possible. I was absorbed into their culture, and who wasn't? Why do I bring the awkward time of 2012 back up? Well, that's because the medieval times had their own version of a turducken. Sort of. While it's not a chicken inside a duck, inside a turkey, inside a pig covered in bacon like EMT did, it's similar and perhaps off-putting for our veggie fans. Basically, there was a chicken sewn to a pig to look like a knight riding on a horse. And yes, I'm sure the chef washed his hands. Right?
Number 4. Going to the scheduled delifing. Entertainment wasn't as accessible or the same as it is now. In modern times, we pull up our phones, turn on our laptops, sit in front of the TV, and there is all the entertainment we need, from battles to baby drama. But back in the Middle Ages, there wasn't much to do after you were done your work for the day. There were forms of entertainment, music, theater, games, sports, etc. But a favorite would have to be going to see the latest ne'er-do-well lose their head. Public shows of punishment were not just something you went to see when you were bored. Actually, their more important purpose was as a deterrent for anyone who thought of maybe committing a crime. And yeah, that would do the trick. It was also a good way to finalize the trial of a criminal for all those who were affected or who were part of the village. Eventually they became more of a private affair, but not entirely, with the last public delifing in the United States happening in 1936. Let's not bring this one back. No, I'm good. I'll pass.
Number 3, witch trials. Speaking of scheduled delifing, witch trials, or rather, get rid of anyone who's been deemed a witch, which, in case you didn't know, was as simple as this. Right then, the young woman down the lane is smarter than her boys in the school. Right then, folks, pitchforks and torches it is. Unfortunately, for a lot of women at the time, it was tough. When has it not been, right ladies? While some men were declared witches too, this was a tool really for people with power to get rid of those who dare oppose them. There's too many royals to mention who took part in this, however, one stands out as Bloody Queen Mary. Names like this were not given for no reason. She was known for sending witches and heretics alike to the stake to be cooked.
Number 2. Outlaw. In movies and TV, characters named as outlaws, specifically in the Wild West sense, are seen as cool guys, outsiders, and wanderers with an air of mystery and possibly power. Trust me when I say it was not what you wanted to be, especially in the medieval times. If you were declared an outlaw in the Middle Ages, you lost all rights, possessions, and any kind of protection being part of society would give you, including people getting in trouble for ending your stay on this plane of existence. You are forced to fend for yourself with nothing to your name, and in a world rife with disease, wars, bandits, and very little readily available food or water, things get harsh quick. If you didn't have a buddy to turn to for help, who you knew for a fact would not literally stab you in the back, then you were pretty screwed. Luckily, I have Andrew. Right?
Yeah! Number 1, ladies. Okay, so let's say you're married. Husband tends the crops. You as the wife take care of the home. This isn't a statement about the patriarchy. I'm just saying taking care of the home is just as important back then. Seriously, it is. Well, your husband comes in from tending the fields one night with a fever. Uh-oh, he's fallen ill, and now he's perished. Now you're left alone with no income and a society that's probably not okay with you working. So that means it's time to pull up your pants. Well, actually, pull them down, as in a scenario like this, it would be time to work that street corner, and a lot of women did do that. The same way Adam works on building Legos in his dungeon. I joke. But as they say, it's the oldest profession in the book, and folks, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Tradition or not.
Let's start at the beginning, how gladiators got going. The notion of gladiators originated with the Etruscans, who preceded the Romans in central Italy. Traditionally, when an Etruscan leader died, as part of the funeral ceremony, a pair of warriors sometimes, fought to the death with their bare hands to honor his warlike spirit. Normal stuff. But over time, this practice becomes institutionalized, and the Romans subsequently imitate it in a more digestible way to them, while simultaneously distancing themselves from the savagery of the Etruscans. Throughout the next 800 years of the Roman Republic, gladiator games remained infrequent on a small scale and only held as part of a funeral service for those of high rank. That practice began to change in the late Republic. Julius Caesar put on a gladiatorial show that featured 320 pairs of gladiators in honor of his father, who'd already been dead for 20 years. Seems like nobody important died recently, and Julius really had a hankering for a gore show. From then on, the gladiator games thrown by him made the younger Caesar popular with the people of Rome. Rome. One notable exhibition took place in 216 BC when 22 fights were held over 3 days to mark the death of a prominent senator. From boo-hoo to yahoo, tradition to entertainment. In ancient Rome, it was tradition for the state to provide entertainment using 2 categories: lude, meaning theatrical performances, dances, and chariot races and other creative pursuits. Then there's monera, or spectacles, such as wild animal shows, death sentences, and other unusual exhibitions. The Romans' concept of entertainment was that most of these events had a religious component, held on religious days, accompanied by prayers and sacrifices, a way of paying homage to the gods. As mentioned, gladiators started out as a weird funerary rite, and Julius segues them into the everyday by having a big melee, so now boom, they're suddenly part of monera. There is scholarly debate if this is truly from public demand alone, or if the gladiatorial games being used as distractions that kept the people subdued so they were just hardcore promoted in the village. Some argued that the game reflected the typical Roman virtues such as courage, endurance, and martial skill, while others, like Roman satirist Juvenal, thought that the games preyed on the Roman unhealthy obsessions with bread and circuses, aka blood sport. In Rome, death sentences and ritual killings were a way of keeping the peace and showing the Romans who boss was. The arena was the next step, an advancement in societal distraction used to entertain the lower class citizens of Rome, but at the same time uniting them together in an uphold of societal rules. Think this is horrific? May I turn your attention to rugby, hockey, and basketball, 3 sports notorious for hardcore hits and the spilling of blood. Think of audience reaction when a fight breaks out, when a tooth goes flying, when someone lands a dirty hit. Yeah, not so archaic, is it?
Number 8. Keys to the city. You know when people say that someone got the keys to the city as a way of saying that person can do whatever they want? Well, that came from the medieval times. You see, back in ye olden times, if you lived in a walled city when nighttime hit, they locked those gates up tight. Don't want some slimy bandits, enemy soldiers, or unwanted flatullists coming and going in the city in the dead of the night. Someone who was particularly well liked or who had done something noteworthy to gain the respect, trust, and admiration of the people would be given a key to the city, giving them the free reign to come and go as they please. We actually still do this, but obviously most cities don't really have walls anymore, so it's more of a symbolic thing, like, hey, you're great, have this little key that opens literally nothing. You're welcome.
Number 7, graveyards. If you're like me, then you've seen enough zombie movies to know that hanging around a graveyard is the last place you want to be. It's their spawn point, duh. And every time you drive by a graveyard, you think to yourself, some zombie related thoughts, but dare not tell anyone for fear of sounding like a weird guy for talking about zombies rising out of the graves because it's sunny out and that just sounds like a Tale from the Crypt episode. Well, medieval people didn't have fears of George A. Romero's movies or that weird corpse guy in Tales of the Crypt Keeper, as people like to hang out in the graveyards. Weird, I know. In medieval times, they were just a part of the town. There weren't really a lot of fences or like barriers. Sometimes there would be plays, small festivals, and even shops set up in graveyards, since graveyard shops pay no tax.
I guess you could say shop till you drop.
All bad impressions aside, I'll stay away, especially with the diseases going around back then.
Number 6, cat burning.
Excuse me, yeah,
Medieval people just hated cats. A lot of the ye old people thought cats were symbols or allies of the big red with the horns. And yeah, they aren't the most pleasant of animals, but I love my cat.
Yeah.
Not that one. Unfortunately, in the Middle Age France, it was custom to burn a barrel full of live cats over a burning fire every Midsummer's Eve, as people shrieked with laughter and danced around with glee. French kings often witnessed it and even ceremoniously started the fire. But they did much more than that too, like King Charles IX, who threw a live fox onto the fire for added variety. Or in 1648, France's King Louis XIV, then aged just 10, lit the tinder on a large bonfire in central Paris, then watched and danced with glee as a basket of stray cats was lowered into the flames. A man who wrote to his brother about the celebration of coronation of Queen Elizabeth I wrote, "Last Saturday, the coronation of Queen Elizabeth was solemnized in the city with mighty bonfires and the burning of a most costly pope, carried by 4 persons in diverse clothing, his belly filled full of live cats, who squalled most hideously as soon as they felt the fire." What the hell?
Number 5, castles. Besides a knight in shining armor, what's the first thing you think of when you think of medieval times? Castles! Yeah, obviously. Yes, I'm talking about castles, but bear with me here, just hear me out. Okay, so when we were kids, we all wanted to live in a huge mansion, right? I mean, who doesn't? I wouldn't though because, well, it would be a pain in the neck to clean. As you grow up, you start thinking about weird things like that. It would be really difficult to clean. But it's a common wish nonetheless. Well, castles basically are medieval mansions, except with a little twist. These castles are also designed with military strategy in mind. So imagine, if you will, you have a world where your parents have a mansion, but they had to add guard towers and an armory and a battalion of soldiers just in case the next kingdom over gets a little too frisky. The positioning of the castle was also very important too, some built by the coast, on top of hills, and even some inside of mountains, all in the name of protection. To me, that's like some Purge level reality where wealthy homes have to be built with defenses in mind. It's kind of messed up.
Number 4. Fair. Punishments for crime in the Middle Ages were different from they are today. Capital punishment happens now still, like it did then, but we don't really put people into exile so much anymore. Unless you count the prison system, but that's another conversation altogether. Back in medieval Ireland though, someone who de-lifed someone else and was judged to be guilty was given to the deceased's family as their unwilling servant. That is, if they failed to pay the oodles of money required to buy their freedom. As we know, people who were forced into manual labor were not treated too nicely, and they pretty much had no rights at all, being seen as property more than an individual. This means that the family that now owns said person could do whatever they wanted with them. Their life was basically forfeit. Now, if the person who ended the life of one of your beloved family members was now given to you to do whatever you wanted with them, what would you do? Yes, me too. Probably. It seems fair to me. Leave the punishment to those who are most affected by the crime.
Number 3, Shark Week. Aunt Flo. She shows up sometimes during those delightful few days that ladies have. I hear you, I know. I'm not a lady, I don't know why I said that. I'm just trying to relate to the audience. But have you ever wondered how things were dealt with before the modern world of feminine hygiene products? Today, you got options, but back then, well, they didn't really exist. Ladies had to come up with methods and honestly, the beginnings of what the products would eventually evolve into. A lot of times it was extra cloth or rags were used, perhaps where the expression on the rag may have come from. Now, I have no issue talking about this because it's natural, it's a part of life. I'm a grown-up, dude. The tradition of this point is in the tradition of hiding it or being ashamed. That's what started in medieval times too, unfortunately. And sadly, it's carried over to today just a little bit. Some even consider cramps to be a punishment for Eve's original sin back then, which is just so stupid. Things have gotten a little better, but I think you can all agree with me, ladies. It's time for everyone else to grow up a little bit.
Number 2, trick or treat, it's Christmas. What? Sorry. In Northern Europe and Scandinavian countries, Yule time meant adopting the tradition we are familiar with from modern Halloween. Dressing up like your favorite spooky characters. Or what it is now, trying to one-up your friends with the hottest insert occupation here costume you can. They didn't dress up as sexy cats or nurses though. But from the day of Christmas to the 12th night, young men would dress up according to, quote unquote, the old fashion of the devil, and go around in the night scaring people in the streets. These young spunky lads would go about as ghosts, trolls, or other strange creatures, and in the 16th and 17th century, some men would even dress as the Yule goat, terrifying children and coming into people's houses demanding cake or cheese, then pleasantly thanking them if he received something, or whacking them with a stick if he didn't. Then the goat would just hop on out of there like this.
That was cute, dude. Thanks, man. Number 1, Lord's Right. This one is just so messed up. Okay, so back in medieval times, imagine if you will that you've just been married to a beautiful woman. Just finished walking down the aisle when the local lord of the land makes a surprise appearance at your wedding. At first you bow and welcome his lordship. That's when he grabs your blushing bride-to-be and looks at you with the snobbiest look a royal could and says, "Sorry bud, Lord's right, gotta take her for a test drive." To make sure everything's great. Yes, that's right, there was a law, or a code if you will, that allowed lords to entertain wives for a few hours. Or like a few seconds. You must also imagine this is a time when speaking out against lords for doing so would not have bode well for you or your wife, so let's just go along with the plan.
Number 10, the bird. To flip somebody the bird, or to flip somebody off in general, of course this means to give them the middle finger. But do we even know why we do this? It's automatic, right? You lose in Mario Kart, you throw it up. Why? Why do we do it? I don't recommend it, first of all, because obviously you're gonna get in a heap of trouble afterwards, whoever's on the receiving end of that bird. Said bird is gonna sail, and it's gonna be upset, whoever gets it. But giving somebody the middle finger comes from 4th century BC Athens. Yes, thank you so much. I love this invention, if you wanna call it that. The philosopher Diogenes expressed how he felt to visitors about Demosthenes. Now, he described his distaste by putting up a middle finger. Now, the idea here was that it was a phallic gesture. Yeah, the middle finger is supposed to be, you know, your and the surrounding curled fingers are meant to represent the you-know-whos, right? We're talking about, yeah, I can't say what I want to say, but we're starting this list off on a great note, aren't we? Number 9, Thermopylae. Our next stop is the coastal passage of Thermopylae in Greece, also known as the Hot Gates back in 480 BC. Now, this was a beautiful stage for a battle that became a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds, and also became a Zack Snyder movie, which is pretty cool, I guess. Under the rule of King Xerxes, the Persian Empire sought to conquer Greece. Outnumbered, a small alliance of Greek city-states led by King Leonidas of Sparta, they resisted. They said, nope, not on my watch. So about 7,000 Greeks faced an estimate 100,000 to 150,000 Persians. Now, the Greeks used the narrow terrain to their advantage, right? They knew this. They funneled the Persian forces and then they held them there for 3 days straight. But on the 3rd day, something happened. On the 3rd day, a local resident betrayed the Greeks, how dare thee, showing the Persians a mountain path that led behind Greek lines. Now, Leonidas was aware of his doomed fate. He dismissed the bulk of his army and remained with, you guessed it, 300 Spartans and a few hundred others to fight to the death. Now, although the Persians ultimately won, the Greeks' heroic stand at Thermopylae allowed the city-states time to prepare for the Persian onslaught that followed. It has since been an enduring symbol of bravery and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. And again, Zack Snyder saw this. He's like, cha-ching, let's do it. A lot of abs. Paint those abs on.
Number 8, the Saqqara Temple. The Pyramid of Djoser, also known as the Step Pyramid, is an archaeological site in the Saqqara necropolis. The discovery of a 4,400-year-old tomb, now seen as UNESCO's World Heritage Site, is the 6-tier, 4-sided structure, which very well may be the earliest colossal stone structure in Egypt, and possibly the world. Stone mounds were made in Europe for millennia, but it was the pyramid shape that started here. It was built 27th century BC during the 3rd dynasty for the pharaoh Djoser. The pyramid is the center of a huge complex and an enormous courtyard surrounded by ceremonial structures and decorations. Its architect was created from the Egyptian architect himself, Imhotep, the high priest of the god Ra. This guy was like the building manager, you know? The head architect. In fact, wasn't even found or really even studied till about the 1920s, and was recently excavated in 2018. The pyramid went through several revisions over the years, and in March 2020, the pyramid was officially reopened for visitors after a 14-year fix-up. Check out Netflix, they do a great documentary on this. Number 7, Queen Nefertiti, the queen of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, the beloved royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Nefertiti and her husband were known for a religious revolution in which they worshipped solely the sun disk Aten as their one and only god. Oh! Blasphemy! She reigned during what was arguably the wealthiest and most lavish period of ancient Egypt. Here's the weird part. We don't know where she is. Usually kings and queens are buried in very spiritual, very high-ranked places like the royal tomb. Easy to find. But nope, no one can find her, or even know what happened to her. In 2015, archaeologists thought, with high-resolution scans, voids that are behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb proposed maybe that she was there. Nope, no Nefertiti. In 2003, archaeologists thought through the hair DNA, Nefertiti's mummy may have been, quote, the younger lady. Nope. Turns out it was just Tutankhamun's mom. So what exactly happened to this famously revered queen? Who knows? Aliens, dude. When in doubt, always aliens. You know what I mean? Number 6. King Tut's death. When archaeologists opened a sarcophagus in Egypt's Valley of the Kings for the first time in 1923, it was the discovery of a lifetime. The ancient Egyptian boy king, King Tutankhamun, the burial chamber of the 19-year-old who ruled 3,300 years ago. But why did he die so young? DNA tests and CT scans show he suffered from malaria, a broken leg, and congenital deformities associated with inbreeding, common amongst royalty. Ouch. Because of his tomb's extremely small size, historians think King Tut's death must have been unexpected respected, and his burial rushed by A, who succeeded him as a pharaoh. The tomb's chambers were packed to the brim with more than 5,000 artifacts including furniture, chariots, clothes, weapons, and 130 of the king's walking sticks. A 24-pound solid gold mask was placed over him, and he was laid in a series of containers, 3 golden coffins, and a granite sarcophagus. His death still has scientists scratching their heads. Also, look up how many archaeologists died months after the cursed tomb had been raided. Yeah, you don't want to know. Number 5, the Lost Labyrinth. Archaeologists uncovered what's believed to be the remains of a long-lost labyrinth below the sand of the Pyramid of Hawara, known as, quote, the Labyrinth. Built by Amenhotep III, it was the most visited sites of the ancient world. Greek Herodotus claimed to have counted 3,000 rooms in the pyramid's funeral complex during the 5th century BC. According to them, the underground temple consists of over 3,000 rooms filled with remarkable hieroglyphics and paintings. Close, too, located less than 100 kilometers from Cairo. In 2008, with the aid of ground-penetrating technology, a Belgian-Egyptian expedition was able to confirm the presence of an enormous underground temple. With no visible remains, the story was thought to be a legend passed down until Egyptologists uncovered its foundations in the 1800s. The results of this expedition indicate the presence of grid-like structures deep beneath the sand. Please tell me there's no minotaur just running around down there. Okay. Number 4, the Mystery Queen. Archaeologists have unearthed a tomb of a previously unknown queen believed to have been the wife of Pharaoh Neferefra, who ruled 4,500 years ago. The tomb was discovered in Abu Sur, an old kingdom necropolis southwest of Cairo, where there are several pyramids dedicated to the pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. The name of his wife had not been known until recently. She was Khenta-Khaz, renowned as the mother of 2 Egyptian pharaohs. Khenta-Khaz I is a mysterious woman who ruled in the 4th dynasty and has archaeologists puzzled at her burial complex in Giza. Though rough evidence for ancient Egyptian queens, the remains of this female leader were undisturbed for 2 millennia within the necropolis until its excavation in the late 1930s. Hieroglyphic inscriptions concerning her title had been discovered and subsequently became open for interpretation. Her title was initially regarded to be, quote, King of Upper and Lower Egypt and, quote, Mother of King of Upper and Lower Egypt. So who was this mysterious, powerful figure in ancient Egypt? Who was she? Number 3, the Dendrolites. All these tombs and underground chambers, how the hell did they see anything under there? Well, we really don't know, but we have some sort of direction. These ancient battery-looking light bulbish things could have maybe been the power source. Ancient Egypt seems to be full of keyholes, drill holes, and shafts that are literally impossible without high-powered tools. Most people say aliens, me included, but I also say the Dendera light bulbs. They've been theorized as being some sort of battery. The Hathor temple at Dendera contains several relief depictions Harsamtus in the form of a snake emerging from a lotus flower. The Dendera light is a variation of this motive, showing Harsamtus in an oval container, a snake inside taking a number of humans to lift, and it holds apparent meanings of the start of creation. Look, I don't care what you say, this thing is a light bulb. It's got a filament. And coils? Come on, drill holes? They couldn't have just lit fires underground? The smoke? The heat? I don't think so. Now, a couple of DeWalt's. Just sanding up the pyramids real nice, you know? Who knows? Who knows? Number 2, the city of Punt. The land of Punt, or the ancient city of Punt, was an ancient kingdom sometime back then. A trading partner of ancient Egypt. It was known for producing and exporting gold, aromatic resins, precious stones, black wood, ivory, you name it. The region is known from ancient Egyptian records of trade expeditions. At time, Punt is referred to as the land of God. No pressure, archaeologists. The exact location of Punt is debated and unknown by historians. Cue Indiana Jones movie. Various locations have been offered: southeast of Egypt, a Red Sea coastal region, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan. No one really knows. First deciphered in Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1822, scholars began reading Egyptian texts, and the mystery got mystery-er. That's not a word. More questions arose as to where Punt was located and what happened to it. The land of Punt is written by voyagers as being praised for its lavish riches and goodness of land. Okay, so it exists somewhere. This is awesome, isn't it? Wouldn't it suck if we already found everything? We're going on an expedition, boy. Grab your things, let's go. And coming in at the number 1 spot, the Sphinx. Where do I even start? Known as the oldest carved rock like ever. Its age is debated literally every day due to the questions it asks scholars. Was it wind erosion? Water erosion? How many times was this thing broken and rebuilt? The Great Sphinx of Giza, the limestone statue of a reclining sphinx, a mythical creature with a head of a human and the body of a lion. Facing directly west to east, it stands on the Giza Plateau on the west bank of the Nile. The face of the sphinx appears to represent the pharaoh Khafra, although this is heavily debated as wrong gears and looking nothing like him. It's since been restored with tons of layers of limestone blocks, although still unfixed. Its nose was broken off for unknown reasons between the 3rd and 10th century. Maybe some artillery fire over the years, who knows. The Sphinx is the oldest known sculpture in Egypt, and archaeologists suggest that it was created in the Old Kingdom using unknown construction methods. Yeah, definitely that battery thing. From 1817 to 1930, this thing was buried up to its neck and written and drawn about for centuries. I wonder what other secrets lay under her right now. I guess we'll eventually find out someday.
Number 10. Andrew, is this you? What? There is no lighter way to put this. We talked about a court jester or a fool, but did you know that some medieval royal courts had professional farters? Yes, that's people whose sole purpose in life was to fart. I'm still trying to figure out how Andrew can fart on command, but these guys did it as a job. These guys would fart their way to being rewarded with houses and lands for their fartscapades. Fartscapades that would include passing their intestinal wind in unique, creative, musical, or amusing ways. I wonder if the mic picked that up. This quote I found from St. Augustine in City of God says, these talented individuals had, quote unquote, such a command of their bowels that they can break wind continuously at will so as to produce the effect of singing. The most famous of the medieval flatulists, no that's not a joke, that's actually what they're called, was Roland the Farter from Hemmingstone Manor in the county of Suffolk, England. In the 12th century, who could shoot water up to 5 feet. He could squirt water out of his bum while farting.
Ready?
Want some water?
Number 9, arranged marriages. Today, the marriage industry makes millions every year. Flowers, design, and of course, the bridal dresses. It's a good business, especially once the weather starts to warm up. You got options today, ladies. Sleeves or no sleeves, veil or no veil, and thousands of other dress designs that I simply just don't understand. But the beauty of it all is that you get to marry the man of your dreams. Hi. I'm not the man of their dreams, let's be honest. Or at least the best smelling one in your social circle. Definitely not me. However, for the ladies of the past, they sometimes didn't get to pick their man as her family or royal court would. A lot of marriages, especially on the high-ups, were often more of a political move than that of a romantic one. Sure, marrying for an alliance sounds cool, but man, dinner time would be like a blind date every night. That's just super awkward. So like where are you from? What's going on? Yeah.
Number 8. Decimation. You've likely heard the term before used to describe the impact of some tragedy or another. However, the word actually has its roots in the Roman military, though its origin is a little different from how you might imagine. See, as I'm sure you know, the Roman military was infamous for its discipline and strategy. But if you've ever worked in any space with more than 10 people, you know it's hard to keep everyone in line. So how did the Romans do it? Simple. If one squad member screws up, the entire unit gets the punishment. Decimation roughly translates to removal of a tenth. The cohort would be divvied up into 10 groups, and each group would draw lots. The group with the shortest straws were then executed by the other 9 by whatever method was determined by their commander. The 9 of the surviving groups were then made to survive off barley, and if they had to relieve themselves, it would be outside of the camp's security. You know what? Maybe the military life just ain't for me. Number 7. The Crassus cocktail. I love a good drink at the end of the day. Just getting a little mix here and there, it's just so fun. Ooh, if it's good, man, just caps off a hard day of work. It seems like Crassus was a man of similar taste. A general and a statesman who'd earned the title the richest man in Rome. Dude ran a bunch of wars, serious campaigns, and his last was against the Parthians, primarily because he was just kind of bent out of shape that the other generals were outshining him in the field. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, Crassus's forces were absolutely slaughtered, and when his son Publius ended up being one of the casualties of war, Crassus went to parley. Negotiations went sour, and he and his entire party were wiped out. Apparently, after such a rough day, the Parthians figured that Crassus could use a little something to take the edge off, so they had him take a sip of molten gold. Fun fact, the melting point of gold is about 1064 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that'll have a kick. Number 6. The fall of Emperor Valerian. One of the later emperors of Rome, Valerian rose to power simply and ruled simply. Went to war a few times, killed a bunch of Christians, got beat up by Goths, basic Roman stuff. So when Valerian was captured by Cameo of Shapur I, it boggles the mind why they went as far as they did in making sure that this dude wasn't just defeated, they made sure his entire genetic code wouldn't survive the humiliation he received. First on the menu was for the Shapur to use him as a footstool while mounting their horses. He was then given the Crassus special, a big old bowl of molten gold right down the gullet, which may or may not have happened while he was simultaneously being alive. His skin was then allegedly stuffed with straw and dyed, hung in the Persian temple for all to see. Seriously, the dude just didn't like Christians. Chill. Number 5. Gaius Valerius Catullus rap battle. Who doesn't love a good beef? Now, Catullus was a major poet, his works moving away from the retelling of classic tales and focusing more on the telling of day-to-day life. The personal nature of his works have lived in the minds of thousands, depicting humor, romance, and the beauty of day-to-day life. However, Catullus was no stranger to critics, two of his biggest being another poet, Furius, and Senator Aurelius. Now, constructive critique can be wonderful for artists. After all, it's the only way that you can improve. However, Catullus seemed to take a different view, writing a poem in dedication to his critics. Commonly referred to as Catullus 16, this poem was so filthy that it wasn't fully translated until the 20th century, and even then, several lines were heavily censored in most publications. Want to hear it? Well, it reads... Number 4. Roman birth control. Romans were... well, they got around a lot. Now, unless you want to deal with the immediate consequences of a whole lot of lovin', you've gotta figure out a way to stay safe. Picking up condoms from a shopper's wasn't really a thing, and Plan B hadn't been invented yet, so what was the plan? Well, it turned out that the Romans had discovered an herb called silphium, which supposedly had contraceptive properties. Whether or not that's actually true remains to be seen, specifically due to the fact that you can't find it anymore. That's right, the Romans were so raunchy and silphium was so popular that they caused the complete extinction of the plant, the last stalk of it reportedly being given to Emperor Nero. Now in 2020 there has been a theory presented that there is a similar herb, or a relative, found in Turkey, and it could be the surviving relative of the plant, but to this day not a sprig of silphium has been found. Apparently it looks like a heart though. Aww, ecological devastation. Number 3. Roman baths. The terms made its way around. Roman baths are synonymous with the country and culture as a symbol of civilization. But you've listened to enough of this list so far, so you can probably figure out where this is going. See, while Romans were known for their hygiene, urine laundry aside, they were usually pretty nasty when it came to bath time. Soap wasn't really a thing, so the baths were basically just huge vats of oil that they just slather up all in there. Now these oils were perfumed, but they were also reused frequently and were washed off using a strigil, a sort of scraping tool, so just spoon the dirt off. Ugh. Number 2. Cato the Younger. Alright, here's a fun one. Marcus Porcius Cato, also known as Cato the Younger, was a Roman senator in the later years of Rome. A hugely influential man, his life was fraught with turmoil and strife. He was also a strong opposer of Julius Caesar's Hellenistic principles. Cato had no trouble joining the opposition on the brewing civil war. Now, during that civil war, Cato took command of a campaign in Utica, a tough campaign that he generally just planned to abandon alongside the Roman Empire. However, one Once they'd been defeated, Caesar moved to pardon Cato's family and allies. Convinced his end was drawing near, Cato took his life against his friends' and family's advice, stabbing himself in the abdomen. Now, some accounts claim that he actually drew out his own entrails from his body when the physicians attempted to heal him, ensuring that he wouldn't see Caesar's Rome. Maybe he knew that Caesar was planning to pardon him as well, which Cato would have considered the crueler punishment. Number 1. Caligula's horse. We'd be remiss not to talk about the antics of Emperor Caligula. Famed for his strange ways, one of the greatest legends of an already infamous emperor was his attempt to have his favored horse, Incitatus, enlisted as a consul. According to Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, this horse was dressed in lush finery, inviting dignitaries to dinners, and according to Cassius Dio, the horse was fed oats mixed with gold flakes and also possibly a priest. Now, a lot of this is left up to debate, and a number of historians will argue that this was nothing more than a prank at the expense of the Senate. While never officially made a consul, this horse has lived on in infamy, inspiring a number of fictional depictions in modern media, including the metal band Caligula's Horse. Regardless of the official status of the horse, the truth seems to be that this was nothing more than an attempt to mock his senators, but what a method of mockery. Number 10. Weddings. When we look back on history, the traditions of marriages generally stand out as unique ways to peer into the lives of ancient civilizations. With the Vikings, marriages were generally done as ways to join houses through blood ties, which were rarely romantic. Traditionally held on Friday, the day of Freya, goddess of fertility, the couple was separated to go through separate rituals. The bride would take a bath and also remove the kronsen, which symbolized her status as a woman who was unwed, and store it for her future daughter. The groom would then go and break into his ancestor's tomb and steal their stuff, usually their swords. During the ceremony, rings and family swords would be exchanged, and a feast would be had in their honor. During this, one tradition was to stab their swords into a pillar. The deeper the sword went, the better their marriage would be and the more children they'd have. Number 9. Teeth painting. When exhuming the many skeletons of Vikings that have passed throughout history, a remarkable detail was found throughout all of them. Notches of varying size, depth, and length were found to have been cut into the teeth of these ancient warriors. The reason for their existence was something of a mystery. Furthermore, comparing the style to historical Vikings, the name of the Danish king Harald Bluetooth suggests that his title may have been slightly more literal than initially thought. This would have been achieved through the application of a mixture of resins and dyes, though whether or not it was permanent would be hard to know for sure, since the evidence has long since rotted away.
In our number 8 spot today, we have the Siege of Masada. The Siege of Masada took place in 73 AD after the fall of Jerusalem, and it was one of the final events of the First Jewish-Roman War. The event took place on and around a large hilltop in what is now current-day Israel, but here's where this ancient mega project comes in. The Romans began to build a massive earth ramp on the western side of the fortress of Masada. They managed to build it all while under the constant fire from those defending the area, and it was still just under 2,000 feet long, and it rose up 200 feet in the air. After building this ramp, they then managed to push a siege tower up the ramp. This ramp does mostly still exist, and basically what they ended up doing was like extending the size of the mountain that Masada was built on. It is absolutely insane that they did all of this just to capture people. All of that for like 960 people. Imagine if we had ancient Romans now. Suddenly all of our cities would be actually accessible. Ramps for everyone. In our number 7 spot today, we have Stonehenge. Perhaps the most famous of all of the monuments on this list, this prehistoric monument is located in England, and it is a set of stones that are oriented towards the sunrise on the summer solstice. This stone monument is thought to have been created somewhere from 3000 to 2000 BC, and it truly is one of the most famous landmarks ever. Stonehenge is thought to have been an ancient burial ground right from early in its creation for somewhere around 500 100 years. There are many theories surrounding this incredible monument regarding who could have created it, as experts just aren't quite sure. Since this was from a time before we had written records, we may just never know. Maybe this one is just destined to stay a mystery. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Yonaguni Monument. Just off of the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, there is a diving location that was first discovered in 1986 by a diver. He noticed some strange sort of formation that was located on the seabed that looked as if it could be some sort of structure, so he swam down to go and investigate. When he went down and didn't find any more answers to his questions, he of course had to spill the tea on what he had stumbled upon. When researchers heard about this, they ended up diving down to check out what this formation could be, and thus the Yonaguni Monument was officially considered discovered. This monument, which kind of resembles stairs made for giants, is made of sandstone and limestone, but there's one super mysterious thing about it. Experts cannot agree on the origins of this thing. Some people believe it was a naturally occurring formation, while others swear that it was man-made. The Yonaguni Monument is at least 10,000 years old, so at the end of the day, anyone's guess is as good as mine. In our number 5 spot today, we have Sacsayhuaman. This site is located in Cuzco, Peru, and it is another fascinating and seemingly impossible stone structure that was built by the Incas. This structure was once believed to have been a fortress, but now it is believed that it may have actually been used for things like ceremonies. Why this is another incredible creation is because of the fact that we can't quite figure out how it could have been built. The stones in the structure fit together so perfectly that they are able to stay together without anything holding them in place, and they've done so for years. This, coupled with how large some of the stones were, is enough to completely stump experts. Despite how well the stones all fit together, apparently they all have different shapes, which has led researchers to believe that the building design was kind of made up as the structure was being built. Imagine that, just improvising building a structure and it lasts for hundreds of years and goes on to stump humanity for a while. I'm just saying, that's pretty cool. It becomes more and more apparent how talented and brilliant the Incas really were. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Nazca Lines. If you were to head to the Nazca Desert, just about 200 miles southeast of Lima in southern Peru, you'd find the most famous geoglyphs in the world, the Nazca Lines. Researchers believe that these lines might be something like 2 millennia old, and other than how they are incredible works of art, they are also completely baffling. The geoglyphs are more than 800 long white lines etched into the desert, as well as 300 geometric shapes and 70 different animal figures. The biggest shape stretches about 1,200 feet across, which leads to my point about why these lines are so incredibly fascinating. These images can only be fully seen from high above in the air, so thinking back 2,000 years ago, how did humans make these without the vantage points we have now? I'm not exactly sure, but it definitely is nothing shy of amazing. In our number 3 spot today, we have Göbekli Tepe. This is a pre-pottery Neolithic archaeological site that is located in Turkey. This site has been dated back all the way to somewhere from 9,500 to 8,000 BC, making it the world's oldest known megaliths, which is just incredible. The site is comprised of a bunch of large circular structures that are being supported by massive stone pillars, many of which are decorated with abstract anthropomorphic details and things, which has provided rare and valuable insight into the prehistoric religion and the iconography of the times when this was built. One of the most amazing things about this area is that it was first used at the beginning of the Neolithic period, which marks the oldest human settlements anywhere in the world. It has been called the world's first temple, and it was used by groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers from a wide area. Without a doubt, this was one of the best archaeology finds of our modern society, and it gives us just a glimpse into what life was like in prehistoric times. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Lothagam North Pillar Site. One of the most incredible archaeological finds in Kenya led to a, well, it wasn't exactly a horrifying discovery, but it certainly was very unexpected. Around 5,000 years ago, a tribe of herders paused by a lake in what is now Kenya in order to bury their dead. This ended up turning into one of the most massive and monumental construction projects Africa had ever seen, which is no easy feat. For 450 years, they dug into the bedrock, piled up slabs of sandstone, and buried their dead for generations with ritual ceremonies, and this led to what researchers now consider consider the earliest and largest monumental cemetery in Eastern Africa. Here's the one kind of unexpected thing that they found here at this site though. Along with the bodies of those who had passed, researchers also found 405 gerbil teeth at this site. As it turns out, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this, and it's because they were used to make a headpiece for just one of those who had passed away. This site might not be as large and tall as some of the other monuments like the pyramids in Giza, but what makes them the most remarkable is that this site was made by the people for the people. Not for emperors or kings and queens, it was for tribe members of every age and gender buried alongside each other. In our number 1 spot today we have Skara Brae. This is an area that is located in Scotland, and it was found in an exceptionally surprising way. In 1850 there was a huge storm that hit Scotland, and it was so bad that around 200 people passed away from it. The next day, however, once the storm had passed, residents of the Orkney Isles began to notice part of the cliff had dislodged, but it uncovered a sort of hidden settlement. Tests were able to date the site back from 3200 BC to 2200 BC, and it was shown to have been inhabited for about 600 years. There were round stone homes here, and the roofs were made out of whalebone and peat. The design of this little city suggested that there wasn't a hierarchy, but rather a group of people living peacefully as farmers, herdsmen, and traders. While the site is small, the houses are in quite great shape for the amount of time it's been. This little settlement is Europe's most complete Neolithic village, and while it is older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids, it's been called the Scottish Pompeii because of how well preserved it is. No one is exactly sure why the residents of this village abandoned it, but it is likely that a change in climate is somewhat, if not fully responsible, and a storm might have been the reason those living here had to leave in haste, which is deduced by how all of their belongings were left behind.
Early last month was the 1630-year anniversary of a slain young emperor. When Valentinian I died in 375, his eldest son Gratian was naturally the next emperor. Yet within only 5 days, the Nubian troops and senate decided that the 4-year-old Valentinian II was emperor. His reign was a harbinger of the 5th century, when children or non-entities reigning as emperors were really just controlled by powerful generals and officials in the west and in the east until the mid-century. Arbogast, an overbearing Frankish master of swords, could also be called a master of manipulators, because I kid you not, you Google this guy and the first result is that he's the first to establish a Roman nominee of his own as a puppet emperor. This is a crisis that reached its peak when Arbogast tried to prohibit the emperor from leading his own Gallic armies into Italy to oppose a barbarian threat. Valentinian in response tried to fire Arbogast. The latter ignored the order, taking the dismissal letter and publicly tearing it up, yelling at the emperor that he had not appointed him in the first place. The reality of where the power lay was very openly displayed in that moment. Imagine trying to yell at Caligula like that. A few short weeks later, Valentinian was found in a hemp necktie. Arbogast chose himself to be the sole investigator and decided the emperor had taken his own life. However, ancient authorities and modern historians alike are not sold. It's long since been believed that Arbogast strangled the emperor. Mary Poppins has her umbrella, Deadpool has his swords, and Zeus, a missing sculpture. Hi, you thought I was leading up to a lightning bolt. What can I say? Gotta keep them guessing. The same way that the statue of Zeus at Olympia does. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a collective of architectural achievements the famous Greek historian Herodotus wrote of. Of these wonders, 4 were destroyed by an earthquake, 2 were destroyed by fire, and 1 is still standing, the Pyramid of Giza. But the was is the emphasis here, because with the statue of Zeus, it was either stolen or destroyed. Over 40 feet tall, it depicted the king of the gods sitting on his throne with a scepter in one hand and the statue of Nike in the other, and an olive garland crowning his head. Like the statue of Athena Parthenos, this was a ivory statue covered in layers of ebony and gold sheets. Unfortunately, like the statue of Athena, its ultimate fate remains a mystery, as the statue of Zeus completely disappears from the historical record. According to Roman historian Suetonius, Caligula wanted to have the statue brought to Rome so he could chop the head off of Zeus and replace it with his own, but Caligula got smoked by his own bodyguards before that could happen. Assuming the statue survived Caligula's plan, then it could have been destroyed during the reign of Theodosius I or II. If somehow it still survived, then probably the 6th century earthquakes did it in.
In our number 8 spot today, we have golden apples. We hear a lot about the golden apples in Greek mythology, but in Norse mythology, they're actually quite an important and often discussed item. The golden apples actually need to be continually eaten by the Norse gods in order to maintain their immortality. The apples also supplied the gods with their strengths as well as their forever youth. The orchard that contained these apples was looked over by the goddess of spring, Idun. The apples are extremely important to the mythology, and in one story, when the goddess gets tricked into giving herself and the apples over to Loki, the gods immediately grew old and weak, but luckily she was returned and everyone's youth was restored. This led people to search for these golden apples at one point, but even if you were to find one of these magic apples, you'd need a constant supply in order to maintain your immortality, and that might be a little bit more difficult than you think. In our number 7 spot today, we have the mushroom of immortality. As early as 475 BC, there are written records that reference the mushroom of immortality, which was a key ingredient in the elixir of life. The lingzi, which is translated to mean supernatural mushroom, is the oldest known mushroom to be used medicinally, which is super cool. According to the Book of Han, people who were masters of esoterica, alchemists, and magicians known as the Fang Shi knew the secret locations on a mountain where these immortality mushrooms grew, but no one else did. This resulted in several Qin and Han emperors to send large expeditions to search for the mushrooms of immortality, but to no avail. While these mushrooms are still used in traditional Chinese medicine today, it doesn't seem as though anyone has been able to actually achieve immortality from them, but maybe we just don't have the correct recipe anymore. In our number 6 spot today, we have Nicholas Flamel. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you've definitely heard this name before, but did you know that the character is actually based off of a real person? Nicholas Flamel lived from 1330 to 1418, and he was a successful French bookseller. What's curious, however, is that about 200 years after his death, there began to be texts that surfaced that were attributed to him. According to these texts, Nicholas had learned secrets of alchemy from Jewish alchemists while traveling in Spain, and it is said that during this time that he acquired the original copy of the Book of Abramelin the Mage. It was then claimed that Nicholas was the one who held the elixir of life as well as the secrets of transmutation, and it was also claimed that he was probably still alive somewhere. Wild stories aside, what is in that book? Clearly people believe that there must be some immortality secrets hidden inside. In our number 5 spot today, we have Anger, a Greek god. Many people generally look on immortality as a good thing or as a positive. In fact, it's well documented throughout history of people trying to achieve immortality. But in the times of ancient Greece, it was sometimes given as a punishment. In Greek mythology, there are plenty of times where a god would get mad at a mortal and the punishment would grant them everlasting life, but that included a punishment that would literally never end. Like the perfect example is the mortal king, Sisyphus. He was always trying to be a smart aleck, and he would often attempt to barter with the gods rather than simply bow down to them, and at that point all the gods were super fed up with him. In the end, they eventually cursed him to live forever in Hades, where he has to continuously roll a boulder up a hill. Once at the top, the boulder rolls back down, and the process repeats. Legend has it that he is still pushing the boulder up that hill to this day. In our number 4 spot today, we have cinnabar. Cinnabar is the common ore of mercury, and it has a long history in ancient cultures, but of course, there's one big issue with it. It causes mercury poisoning. This is exactly why it's super strange that this is the central ingredient to the Taoist elixir of immortality. The elixir, which was called Huandon, or the reverted elixir, it was believed that certain materials such as cinnabar or gold, when ingested, would instill some of their qualities into the body and rid the body of any imperfections that caused mortality. Of course, we now know that unfortunately, most of the precious items in this elixir were highly poisonous, and they ended up doing the exact opposite of what they were intended to do. Many people died, including Tang Dynasty emperors, and it is said that this is part of what caused the shift from trying to find outside substances to create immortality to finding a way to harness one's natural energy in order to gain immortality. In our number 3 spot today, we have Amrita. There is a collection of Vedic hymns called the Rig Veda, and according to these Hindu hymns, Amrita, which is sometimes called soma, is a drink that can give someone immortality. Rig Veda 8:48-3 says, quote, "We have drunk soma and become immortal. We have attained the light the gods discovered. Now what may foemen's malice do to harm us? What, O immortal, mortal man's deception?" While Amrita and its consumption by humans has been well documented throughout history, the knowledge of where to get it has been lost. It is believed to have been some sort of plant or fungus, and the instructions for the preparation of it involved things like pounding parts of the plant into paste or to release its juices. It would sometimes be filtered through wool and then mixed with cow's milk before being consumed. Amrita was often said to have been found in mountainous regions, but despite there being such detailed accounts of its use, the true identity of it has been lost, and now sometimes ritual prayers will include an apology to the gods for the lack of Amrita. In our number 2 spot today, we have eating a mermaid. This is definitely on the top of the list when it comes to the strange. In Japanese mythology, there is a mermaid creature known as a ningyo, which is described as a cross between a carp and a monkey. These creatures lived in the sea, and they usually brought bad luck and stormy weather with them, and if one washed up on shore, it was thought to be an omen of war. This leaves me wondering why anyone would ever want to be near one, but as legend has it, a girl known as the 800 Nun, one day her father accidentally brought her the meat of this creature, and she ate it and was cursed with immortality. It was called a curse because she was horribly sad for many years after having to watch many husbands and children of hers pass away, which, yeah, that would be an absolutely terrible part of immortality. After being horribly sad for many years, she decided to devote her life to Buddha and become a nun, and in the end, because of her holiness, she was allowed to pass away at the age of 800. I guess maybe immortality isn't as attractive as some of us once thought. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Philosopher's Stone. Turns out this thing wasn't just a Harry Potter relic, it was based on a real thing people believed could grant the power of immortality. It has long been believed that the Philosopher's Stone could be made out of ordinary substances that exist everywhere, but we just don't have the information needed in order to recognize them. This is why in the first Harry Potter movie, Voldemort is searching for the stone. He's trying to find a way to live again, and he thinks the stone is the key. It is thought that this may have been created by a man named Nicholas Flamel. Yes, we just talked about him. Yes, he is also a character in Harry Potter, and he was also a real person.